Hey there, welcome to Bread Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The old hardwood floors creaked beneath Marcus Wright's feet, groaning and protesting, as if complaining about their new tenant. Each step down the long, shadowy hallway echoed through the hollow silence of the apartment. This silence was exactly what he had been searching for. It was thick, viscous, and almost tangible after months of deafening chaos in his soul caused by his breakup with Emma and the subsequent firing from his job. This silence seemed healing. The apartment was a true time capsule, a Victorian-era building on the outskirts of town, with impossibly high ceilings that still bore decorative moldings in the shape of roses and vines, painted over with countless layers of white paint. Heavy, almost black wooden furniture made from solid oak, covered with yellowed lace doilies. The smell was dense, a complex bouquet of mothballs, old paper, and something elusive and sickly sweet like wilted flowers. Marcus, as an architectural restorer, found a special melancholic charm in this. He saw not junk, but history. Every cracked varnish on a cabinet door, every scratch on the floor spoke of decades of life that had passed within these walls. The landlord, a dry old man named Robert Ashford, had rented him the apartment for almost nothing. There was one condition, and it seemed to Marcus more like a bonus than a restriction. Throw nothing away. Don't start any major renovations. Let everything remain as it was when Dorothy Miller lived here. Marcus readily agreed. He didn't need modern renovations and glossy surfaces. He needed peace, refuge. The first few days were almost idyllic. He slept until noon, wandered around the apartment touching old things, sorting through his few belongings. He even undertook a small professional study of his new dwelling, tapping walls, examining joints, admiring the quality of construction. They built to last. In the long hallway, behind a piece of peeling wallpaper, he discovered something strange, the outline of a brick-tub doorway. It was low, clearly not leading to a neighboring apartment. Most likely it was an old storage room or utility closet that had been walled up for lack of need many years ago. He ran his hand over it, feeling the rough brickwork under his fingers through a thin layer of plaster. Strange decision. Usually such niches were simply covered with plywood. Here someone had taken great pains, as if wanting to seal something forever. This little mystery only added charm in his eyes. In the evening, he sat on the wide windowsill in the living room, smoking and watching the first snow swirl below in the sparse light of the street lamps. City noise barely reached here. Only occasionally could he hear the muffled rumble of a freight train. Silence. Blessed, saving silence. Sometimes he would take out his phone and open the gallery. His fingers would find the last photo with Emma. They stood against the backdrop of some mansion he had restored, squinting in the sun. Emma was laughing. He remembered that day. A week later, she said she was leaving. "You live in the past, Marcus," she had said then. "You love ruins more than living people. You'll become a ruin yourself soon." He smiled bitterly. Well, here he was in perfect ruins for himself. Emma would be horrified by this apartment, and that only made him feel bitter. He first heard it on the fourth night. He woke from a strange sensation, not from a sound, but from the anticipation of one. He lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar creaking of the old house. And then, from somewhere deep in the apartment, from the direction of the kitchen, came a barely audible scratching sound. It wasn't a creak or a knock. It was a hissing, quiet, monotonous, like a needle sliding across the end of a record. Marcus sat up in bed, his heart beating slightly faster. Burglars were unlikely. He had locked the door with all 3 locks, including the massive deadbolt that seemed more reliable than any modern system. He got up, put on his robe, and tiptoed down the hallway. The creaking of the parquet under his bare feet seemed deafening. The hissing led to the kitchen. A small, almost square room with a yellowed cabinet and an old Frigidaire refrigerator that hummed like a small tractor. The source of the sound was it, a beige plastic box of an intercom on the wall above the table. A standard 1950s model with 1 volume control wheel. He had seen such things at his grandmother's house as a child. But this one was dead. The wire leading to it had long been cut and painted over along with the wall. It couldn't work, but it was working. The hissing became louder and quieter by turns, and through it, as if breaking through a thickness of water, a melody began to emerge. Familiar, simple, a lullaby. Rock-a-bye baby in the treetop when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. The voice was female, clear, but somehow strange, devoid of warmth, as if it wasn't a living woman singing, but a wind-up doll. Marcus froze, standing in the kitchen doorway. A chill ran down his spine. This was strange, impossible, but he approached closer, leaned toward the plastic box. The melody flowed directly from its slots. He turned the volume wheel, 0 reaction. The sound didn't change. It was quiet, barely audible, but persistent. Interference flashed through his head the first rational explanation. Old house, old wiring, somewhere nearby a powerful transmitter, and this thing picks up a phantom signal like a crystal radio. Yes, exactly. It's just physics. It was silly to be scared. He stood for another minute, listening. The melody ended and began again, and again. The same verse endlessly, annoying and at the same time lulling. Despite its strange origin, there was something nostalgic in this sound, something from a distant, safe childhood. He remembered how his mother sang this song to him. His heart felt a little warmer. He waved his hand, returned to the bedroom, and to his surprise, fell asleep almost immediately. He had a dream bright, colorful. He was small, sitting on his grandfather's lap at the cottage, and grandfather was carving a wooden horse figure for him. The smell of shavings, warm sun on his cheeks. He woke up in the morning with a light smile, for the first time in many months. The next night, everything repeated. Again awakening after midnight, again quiet hissing, again the lullaby. Marcus didn't even get out of bed. The old house lives its own life, he thought philosophically, remembering the pleasant dream. This sound stopped seeming threatening. On the contrary, it became a harbinger of peace. He was too tired to fight the ghosts of the past, both real and imaginary. This quiet sound even began to calm him. It became part of his night routine, background noise that helped drown out his own thoughts. He began to get used to it. So a week passed. Marcus began to settle in, sorted out his books, arranged his sketches and drawings on the shelves, called his only close friend Jake, with whom they had worked together. "Well, hermit, how's life in your den?" Jake asked cheerfully. "Fine, Quiet, Marcus replied. Quiet? You're serious. You live in an old house. There should be old ladies knocking on the walls at night and pioneer ghosts marching down the corridors. Marcus chuckled. Well, not quite. I have my own radio broadcast here. Nighttime. He briefly told about the intercom and the lullaby. Jake laughed. Dude, you're going crazy from loneliness. It's 100% some radio amateurs in the neighborhood playing around, or just glitches in the old network. Download some EMF detector on your phone, see what it shows. If it goes off the scale, then the wiring is shorting somewhere and creating a field. Rip it out to hell and sleep peacefully. Yeah, I'm kind of used to it already, Marcus admitted. You know, there's even something cozy about it. I sleep like a baby to it. Cozy, buddy, you're scaring me. Soon you'll start talking to it. Let's better have a beer on the weekend. Come over, get some fresh air. Maybe, Marcus said. After this conversation, Marcus thought for the first time maybe Jake was right. Out of interest, he downloaded the app his friend had suggested. During the day, the device showed nothing unusual. At night, when the lullaby played again, he went to the kitchen with his phone. The needle on the detector screen, as soon as it approached the intercom, shot into the red zone and went off the scale. The phone vibrated. Marcus jerked his hand back. The interference was incredibly strong, but only here, within a meter radius of the box. In the rest of the apartment, everything was calm. This was strange, too localized for external interference. The peace that he had initially felt from the lullaby began to be replaced by light anxiety. He began to listen to it more carefully, and then he heard it. It happened on the 10th or 11th night. The melody was the same, but in the pauses between musical phrases, almost at the edge of hearing, something else broke through. A quiet, plaintive sob, as if somewhere far away a child was crying. Marcus froze lying in bed, his whole body covered with goosebumps. And this no longer resembled radio interference. The crying was too alive. It repeated sob, pause, sob again. It wove into the melody, making it monstrous, distorting its essence. The lulling song turned into torture. Nostalgic comfort evaporated, leaving behind a sticky residue. The next night, the crying became louder. Now it could no longer be dismissed as a play of imagination. It was distinct children's crying, full of despair and pain. It mixed with the emotionless female voice, creating a nauseating duet. Marcus's peace evaporated without a trace. It was replaced by sticky, rational fear. Sleep no longer came. He lay with open eyes until dawn, listening to every lullaby from the kitchen. Dreams also changed. Now he dreamed of the long, dark corridor of his apartment and the bricked-up door at the end, from behind which came this very crying. During the day, he felt broken, walked around the apartment like a shadow, constantly casting sidelong glances at the kitchen, at that damned beige box on the wall. He couldn't stand it anymore. Jake's advice turned out to be the only way out. Waiting for evening, he armed himself with a heavy screwdriver and hammer, deciding to act before midnight, while it was still silent. He approached the wall. The plastic case was old, yellowed, and brittle. He pried the edge with a screwdriver. The case cracked and gave way, revealing the insides. A tangle of old, rotted wires covered with dust and a small, rusty inductor coil. Nothing that could produce sound. No speaker. What the hell, he muttered, sticking the screwdriver deeper, trying to break the entire structure out of the wall. Metal scraped against plaster, and at that moment Exactly at midnight, the intercom hissed. But this wasn't the usual quiet hissing. This was loud, furious noise like a detuned radio. Marcus recoiled. The noise grew, filling the kitchen, and suddenly through it burst a voice not singing, but screaming. High, distorted, piercing scream that hurt his ears. It was a scream of pain and rage at the same time, amplified 100-fold. At the same instant, the light bulb overhead flickered and went out with a loud pop. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. The scream cut off as suddenly as it had begun. Absolute, ringing silence set in. Even the refrigerator stopped humming. Marcus stood in the middle of the dark kitchen, unable to move. In his hand, he still clutched the screwdriver. His heart was pounding somewhere in his throat. The air smelled sharply of ozone. He stood like that for probably a minute, then slowly, by touch, made his way out of the kitchen and got to the hallway, where in the dresser drawer lay a flashlight. With trembling hands, he turned it on. The beam picked out familiar outlines of the corridor from the darkness. He shone toward the kitchen. On the threshold lay fragments of the light bulb. He didn't dare go back there. He found the blown fuses in the electrical panel on the stairwell, turned them on. Light came on in the apartment, except in the kitchen. The bulb had burned out. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in the living room with all the lights on, staring at one point. He understood two things. First, this wasn't interference or glitches. Second, he had made a huge mistake trying to break it. He had angered it, whatever it was. The intercom in the kitchen was silent, but now the silence in the apartment no longer seemed saving. It had become hostile. It was filled with expectation. A week passed after the incident in the kitchen. A week of deafening, tense silence. The intercom no longer made any sound, no hissing, no lullabies, no crying. It was silent, and this silence was worse than any scream. Marcus tried to go into the kitchen as little as possible, made quick sandwiches, brewed tea, and quickly left. Each time, passing by the broken but still hanging box on one wire, he felt a chill run down his spine. It seemed to him that it was watching him. Sleep became a luxury. He fell asleep at dawn, exhausted by anxious expectation, and woke up in a couple of hours from the slightest rustle. The old house, which had previously seemed cozy to him, now turned into a source of constant fear. Creaking parquet, wind howling in the chimney, water gurgling in the radiators, every sound made him start. He began to notice what he hadn't paid attention to before. Dark corners in the apartment seemed darker than they should be. Sometimes, casting a casual glance down the long corridor, he saw some movement out of the corner of his eye. But when he looked closely, nothing, just the play of light and shadow. One night he woke up to a quiet, rhythmic knocking. The sound came from the corridor, from where the bricktop door was. He lay without breathing and listened. The knocking continued for about 5 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. Work that he tried to do at home, some small orders for digitizing old drawings, wasn't going well. He couldn't concentrate. All his thoughts revolved around the apartment and what lived in it. He called Jake again. "Listen, you were right. I need to get out of here," he said, trying to make his voice sound steady. "What did the pioneer ghosts finally get to you?" Jake chuckled, but then became serious. "Your voice sounds strange. Are you okay?" "Not really. Some weird stuff is happening here, Jake. Really creepy stuff." Marcus, stumbling, told about his attempt to break the intercom. about the scream and the extinguished light. Shit, Jake could only say. Maybe a short circuit. Old wiring, you said it yourself. You shorted something with your screwdriver. That's why it exploded. And the scream, well, you know, acoustic effects, resonance. That wasn't resonance, Jake. That was a scream, a living one. Silence hung on the line. Okay, Jake finally said. I don't know what this is, but you definitely need to change the scenery. Come to me right now. Take things for a couple of days, live with me, get yourself together. The offer was tempting, but Marcus was ashamed. Ashamed to admit even to himself that he, an adult man, was afraid of his own apartment. And something else held him back, a strange, irrational feeling, as if he couldn't just leave like that. As if he had to figure it out. It was like a professional itch of a restorer. He couldn't leave a historical object in which a hidden, incomprehensible detail had been discovered. Thanks, Jake, I'll think about it, he lied. I just needed to talk it out. Think fast, his friend said insistently. This time capsule of yours won't do you any good. After hanging up, Marcus realized that he was alone with his problem. No one would believe him. He had to find a logical explanation. He was a person with a technical education, after all. He decided to start from the beginning with the history of the house. His profession gave him access to city archives. The next day, having slept poorly, he went to the central archive. Hours spent looking through dusty folders, and a creaky microfilm machine brought the first results. He found the house records of his building, leafing through yellowed pages with the names of tenants. He got to his apartment, number 42. The family that moved in after the war. The Morrison family. Mother Helen Morrison and daughter Lucy Morrison, born 1938. In the father column was a dash. Next to the girl's name was the date of departure, winter 1946. Cause, death, pneumonia. Next to the mother, the same date. But the cause was different, departed in unknown direction. This didn't match Robert's story. Officially illness, but then why did the mother disappear? Marcus dug deeper, requesting newspaper files from that year, and found it. A small note in the crime section, tragedy in the house on Maple Street. In one of the apartments, the body of 7-year-old Lucy M. was found. The cause of death is being determined. The girl's mother, Citizen Morrison H., is wanted for questioning. Neighbors claim that lately the woman had been behaving strangely, not letting anyone into the apartment, and saying, a sin that needs to be hidden. The bricked-up door. Marcus felt ice-cold sweat run down his spine. He returned to the architectural plans of the house and saw that where he had found the blocked door, there really was a storage room on the original plan. But on a later plan dated the 60s, it was already shaded and marked as sealed. Something was there after all, or someone. Returning to the cursed apartment, he felt that the atmosphere had changed. The silence became even denser, and it seemed to him that he was being watched from the corners. He turned on the lights throughout the apartment, even in the bathroom and toilet, but it didn't help. The darkness didn't retreat, it just pressed itself, hid in closets under the bed, behind heavy curtains. And then he began to notice other things. Small, but no less creepy because of that. He clearly remembered leaving a book on the table, and now it was lying on the windowsill. A cup he had drunk tea from had moved to the very edge of the table. At first, he attributed this to his own absent-mindedness, but then it began happening more and more often. Once he went into the bedroom and saw that the door of the old wardrobe was ajar. He clearly remembered closing it. Looking inside, he went cold. On a hanger among his few shirts hung something foreign. A small, faded children's dress from the 40s. He slammed the door and jumped back as if from fire. His heart began to beat frantically. This couldn't be. He had searched the apartment, he would have noticed, so it appeared here by itself. Fear was turning into panic. He decided to talk to the neighbors. Maybe someone else knew something. He was chosen by an old lady from the first floor, Eleanor Hayes, who seemed to have lived in this house forever. He caught her at the entrance. "Mrs. Hayes, hello. I'm your new neighbor from upstairs 42. Marcus." I know," the old woman mumbled, looking him up and down. "Thin. You probably don't eat anything." Dorothy also got all dried up toward the end. "I wanted to ask about her, actually, and about the apartment. You've lived here a long time. Since the house was built, I was still a girl when I moved here with my parents. My whole life here. Tell me, did anything strange happen in apartment 42? Maybe some stories, rumors." The old woman suddenly became serious. Her faded eyes looked at Marcus attentively. "Did the music box start working?" she asked quietly. Marcus was taken aback. "You mean the intercom? How do you know?" "It's always like that, with every new tenant. First it sings, lulls, and then the bad stuff starts." Dorothy was also happy at first, said it was like returning to youth, and then she became afraid of everyone. Stopped leaving the house. Said she wasn't alone in the apartment, that a hungry child lived there. She even left food for him in the kitchen. A saucer of milk, a piece of bread, became very strange. "What child, Lucy?" Marcus asked, deciding to check his guess. The old woman's eyes widened. "How do you know the name?" "Yes, Lucy. Poor girl, I remember her. Such a quiet little thing. And her mother Helen, after her husband's death, went completely mad. Kept whispering that her daughter was unusual, that she was atoning for sin. And then Lucy got sick, screamed terribly at night, and then suddenly became quiet. And Helen came out into the yard, pale as death, and said that the daughter had gone to relatives in the village. And she herself disappeared a couple of days later. And only then the smell started. The police came, but they never found the body. Officially, everyone in the house knew that she had walled her up in the storage room. And since then, that apartment has been cursed. It loves lonely ones, those whose souls hurt. It feeds on that. Before Dorothy, a violinist lived there, a young man, also alone. At first, he played all day, and then he became quiet. Moved out in one night, even left his expensive bow. Said that foreign music appeared in the apartment that was driving him crazy. You should move out of there before it's too late. Marcus stood stunned by this story. The legend, the newspaper clipping, the neighbor's words, everything merged into one terrifying picture. A hungry child, the lullaby, loneliness. A violinist whom foreign music drove crazy. Dorothy leaving food for a ghost. And now him. Returning home, he felt like a condemned man. Now he knew what he was dealing with, not a ghost, something worse. An echo of tragedy that had absorbed into the very walls of this house and learned to hunt people. At night, he didn't go to bed. He sat in an armchair in the living room, armed with a heavy poker from the long-defunct fireplace. He waited. After midnight, it began. First, he heard a quiet rustling in the corridor, as if someone small was running their hand along the wallpaper. Then quiet, barely audible laughter. Children's. Marcus gripped the poker so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The laughter sounded again, this time closer, right behind the living room door. And then the door handle began to slowly, with a creak, go down. Marcus jumped up, pointing the poker at the door. It opened with a creak. There was no one in the dark doorway, but from the corridor, from the deepest darkness, it was looking at him. At first, he saw only two dim light's eyes. They hung in the air at the level of a child's height. Then a figure began to emerge from the gloom. Thin, disproportionate, elongated, as if drawn by a sick imagination. It had long, spider-like limbs that bent unnaturally. The head was too big for the frail little body, covered with sparse, matted hair. But the most terrible thing was the face. Smooth, waxy, without a nose or eyebrows, and a huge black mouth without lips, stretched in a terrible smile. It didn't walk, it seemed to flow along the floor, trembling like a mirage over hot asphalt. And as it approached, that very smell that Marcus had felt from the very beginning began to spread through the room, the smell of old, wilted flowers. The smell of decay. The creature stopped a few meters from him, tilted its head to the side, and from its black mouth came a familiar sound. But it was no longer a lullaby. It was quiet, plaintive crying that he had heard from the intercom. Crying that froze the blood in his veins. Marcus stood paralyzed with horror. He couldn't scream or move. He just watched this thing cry, not taking its dim, inhuman eyes off him. He realized that Mrs. Hayes was right. It was hungry, and it had come for him. The horror was absolute. It wasn't like fear of heights or fear of the dark. This was something primordial, coming from the deepest depths of the subconscious. The feeling a mouse experiences when frozen before a snake's gaze. Marcus stood in the middle of the living room, convulsively clutching the useless poker, and looked at the creature in the doorway. It stopped crying. The black slit of its mouth closed, and it took a step forward. The movement was wrong, jerky. Its long, thin limbs stretched out, touched the parquet, and its entire body pulled up after it like an insect. The smell of decay and wilted flowers became unbearable. It clogged his nostrils, caused nausea. Marcus finally managed to move. He took a step back, bumped into the armchair. "What do you want?" he croaked. His voice was foreign, weak. The creature stopped, tilted its head again, and suddenly a whisper swept through the room. It didn't come from its mouth, but from everywhere at once, from the walls, from the ceiling, from behind Marcus himself. This was a children's thin voice. "Cold," it whispered. "I'm so cold." Marcus felt real, physically tangible cold sweep through the apartment. Breath escaped from his mouth in a cloud of steam, and the windows fogged up. "Sing to me," the voice whispered. "Sing a lullaby like Mommy did." This demand was so absurd and monstrous in its simplicity that for a second, paralysis was replaced by rage. The rage of a cornered animal. "Go to hell," he screamed, not recognizing his own voice. "Go to hell." He swung the poker and struck with all his might toward the creature. But the heavy metal rod passed through it like through smoke and hit the door frame with a crash. The creature didn't even flinch. It only slowly stretched its lipless mouth in a terrible, triumphant grin. And then from its mouth poured the melody, that same lullaby. But now it was loud, distorted, full of static screeching and hissing, like that time in the kitchen. The sound hit his ears, screwed into his brain. Marcus pressed his hands to his ears, but it didn't help. The music sounded in his head. He He rushed to run. Not looking where he was going, he burst out of the living room, rushed past the frozen creature down the corridor, and lunged at the front door. The key in the lock turned. Another lock, the deadbolt. The door wouldn't give. He pulled it, pounded on the thick wood with his fists, but it was as if it was welded to the frame. He tried his phone. On the screen was only static, like on an old TV, and from the speaker came that same distorted lullaby melody. The lullaby behind him became louder. It mixed with quiet, giggling laughter. Marcus realized that he couldn't get out of the apartment. He was trapped. It was playing with him. He rushed into the bedroom, slammed the door behind him, and propped it with a heavy dresser. The room was dark. He hadn't turned on the light here. He ran to the telephone on the nightstand. The wire was pulled out of the socket. It had taken care of everything. At this moment, there was a quiet scratching sound on the door from the other side, as if someone was running nails over wood. "Open up," the voice whispered from behind the door. "I want to sleep. I need my song." The scratching became louder, more insistent. Quiet, dull thuds were added to it. Marcus, backing deeper into the room, looked around desperately. His gaze fell on the laptop lying on the table, a saving thought. He rushed to it, opened it, pressed the power button. While the system was loading, the knocking on the door became stronger. The wood cracked, and the dresser propping the door began to slide. Finally, the desktop loaded. There was no Wi-Fi, of course, but he didn't need it. He opened the music folder. Jake had once dumped gigabytes of heavy rock and industrial music on him. Marcus found the most aggressive, loudest composition and turned the volume to maximum. From the laptop speakers came a deafening roar of guitars and drums, chaotic, angry, full of life and rage. The knocking on the door stopped. The distorted lullaby choked. For a second, silence reigned, broken only by the roar of music. Marcus felt a surge of hope. It was afraid of this invasion of the modern, aggressive world into its rotten kingdom of sorrow. But hope died before it could be born. From behind came a deafening crack. The door flew off its hinges, throwing the dresser aside. On the threshold stood it, but now it looked different. It was all trembling, its contours were floating, and from its black mouth, along with the resumed lullaby, clouds of black smoke were pouring out, which seemed to be trying to swallow, digest the sounds of rock music. In the light of the street lamps penetrating the room, its skin seemed translucent, and underneath it, darkness seemed to swirl. It wasn't hurrying. It slowly moved its spider-like paws and moved toward him. Marcus looked desperately at the windows. 3rd floor. High. He hit the glass with his elbow. The glass cracked, showering him with fragments. Cold night air burst into the room. He threw one leg over the windowsill. Below were the bare branches of trees and snow-covered lawn. The chances of surviving the jump were small, but it was better than staying here. "Don't go," the voice whispered in his head. This time there was no threat in it, only infinite, all-consuming sadness. "Don't leave me alone." There was such genuine anguish and loneliness in the voice that Marcus froze for a second. He remembered Dorothy's diary. Poor child, you want to comfort him. He remembered his own pain after the breakup with Emma, his burnout, his desperate desire to hide from the world. This creature, it was the embodiment of loneliness, a concentrate of grief and despair left in these walls decades ago. Helen, Lucy, the violinist, Dorothy. It wasn't any one of them. It was all of them. an emotional parasite that wore the mask of a child, because children's grief is the purest and strongest, and it was drawn to the same as itself. This momentary hesitation, this belated insight, became fatal for him. It lunged. This wasn't a jump, but a lightning-fast throw. It covered the distance between them in an instant. Its long, cold fingers, like dry branches, dug into his shoulder. The grip was deadly. Marcus was pierced by icy cold, much stronger than the night frost. He felt life leaving him, not blood, but something else: warmth, emotions, memories. His fear, his despair, even the remnants of his anger. All this was being sucked out of him greedily, like a dying man of thirst. He saw how its face was changing. The smooth, waxy skin rippled, and his own features began to appear on it. His own features, distorted, frozen in a mask of horror. It wasn't just feeding on him. It was absorbing him, becoming him. The last thing he saw were its eyes. Dim lights flared up, and in their depths, he saw the reflection of his own fading soul. The last thing he heard was a quiet, clear lullaby melody, which was already being sung by his own voice, coming from the black mouth of the monster. Rock-a-bye baby, in the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. The cold filled him completely. The world narrowed to one point and went out. The door to apartment 42 was broken down by rescuers around 4 in the morning. An anxious call from one Jake, who after the interrupted connection had tried in vain to call his friend and eventually called emergency services, reported that his friend was locked inside. He was in danger, and he might not be in his right mind. The first to enter the apartment was a young police sergeant, followed by 2 rescuers in helmets. "Police," the sergeant shouted loudly. "Anyone alive?" There was no answer. The apartment was plunged in silence. There was a strange, cloying, sweet smell in the air. In the living room, there was a mess: an overturned armchair, a poker lying on the floor. The bedroom door was knocked out and lay on the floor. The sergeant carefully looked into the bedroom. The window was broken, glass fragments on the floor, and a few drops of blood. From the speakers of a cooling laptop, silence. It was very cold in the room, but there was no one. "Clear," he said into the radio. "Looks like the subject left the premises through the window." They searched the apartment once more. Everything was in its place: old furniture covered with dust, yellowed doilies, stacks of books. In the kitchen hung an intercom broken out of the wall. "Strange, all this," muttered one of the rescuers, examining the knocked-out door. "To knock out a door like that, you need inhuman strength. Maybe some drug addict." "Could be," the sergeant supposed. "All kinds of things happen. We'll file the report and leave." They left. The search for Marcus led to nothing. He simply disappeared, dissolved. Jake went to the authorities for a long time, but eventually the case was closed. After all, it's not uncommon for adult men to decide one day to throw everything away and start a new life. Several months passed, and apartment 42 was empty again. Silence returned to its walls, silence full of expectation. One day, someone rang the doorbell. On the threshold stood a young couple, students, recently married, looking for cheap housing. The guy was a beginning artist. The girl was studying to be a teacher. The door was opened by the new owner, Robert Ashford's nephew, who had inherited the property. "Come in, take a look," he said politely. The apartment is, of course, vintage, but spacious and quiet. The previous tenant moved out suddenly, Even left some things behind, but we cleaned up here." The couple went inside. The girl wrinkled her nose. "Smells kind of strange. Dampness," she said. "And cold," added the guy, rubbing his hands. But his artist's eye had already caught details. The play of light from the high windows, the texture of old walls. "But there's amazing light here, and the atmosphere is inspiring," he said. They went to the kitchen. On the wall, in its former place, hung a neat beige intercom box. It looked almost like new. The wire was neatly hidden under a fresh layer of plaster. "Does this work?" the girl asked, nodding toward the intercom. "No, what are you thinking?" the owner chuckled. "That's just for decoration, atmosphere." They walked around a bit more, and succumbing to the surprisingly low price and inspiring atmosphere, they agreed. On the very first night, when the young wife woke up to get a drink of water, she stopped at the kitchen threshold. From the beige box on the wall came barely audible, quiet hissing, and through it, as if from far away, a familiar, lulling melody broke through. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word, Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The voice was male, very calm and a little sad. The girl smiled. "How nice," thought Anna. "There's something so soulful about this old house." She stood a little longer, listening to the melody, and thought she heard something else, a quiet, plaintive sob, as if somewhere far away a child was crying. She shuddered, and the spell was broken, just imagination. She returned to bed to her sleeping husband, not yet knowing that the hunger lurking in these walls had awakened again, and that now the lullaby would play for both of them. Of course, an apartment with special atmosphere, but the intercom was very creepy indeed. The headlights of rare cars cut through the darkness, illuminating the gas station like a solitary beacon. A bright, almost defiant island of light in the middle of endless night, and the dense wall of forest that crept almost to the very pumps. August in Oregon had been suffocatingly hot during the day, but here on the windswept Highway 97, the nights already breathed with autumn coolness, carrying with them the scents of rotting leaves, pine needles, and damp earth. Jake Miller, a 21-year-old journalism student, was trying to kill another 12-hour shift by reading his textbook on investigative reporting. The chapters on fact-checking and source verification refused to stick in his head under the monotonous humming of fluorescent lights and the peaceful rumbling of drink coolers. Behind the enormous floor-to-ceiling window of the little store, impenetrable darkness reigned, only occasionally torn by the lights of passing trucks that rushed somewhere south toward California or back north toward Portland. The work, of course, wasn't without its perks. Sit there, read, and occasionally pump gas for truckers or sell coffee and candy bars to midnight travelers. They paid well here, especially for night shifts, which was the main argument for students. The quiet and solitude also had their advantages. You could peacefully prepare for the approaching finals. From 6 until 11 in the evening, there was still some traffic. Locals returning from weekend cabins, people from the nearest town of Cedar Falls would stop by for cigarettes. But after midnight, the highway seemed to die out completely. It was then, in the deepest pre-dawn hours, when the world of the living seemed to fall asleep, that they began to appear. At first, Jake blamed everything on fatigue and his imagination. But then a man stopped by in an old, beaten Ford pickup, the color of rotten cherries, rust bubbling on it as if the truck had just been pulled from a riverbed. He got out silently, shoved crumpled 20s and a plastic gas can that had seen better days through the window, and bought exactly 10 gallons of the cheapest regular, unleaded. Jake glanced briefly at his face, pale to the point of blue as if molded from wax, and his eyes. His eyes were strange, dark, completely without whites, like two coals pressed into snow. They looked without blinking, straight through Jake. Heavy shift the guy probably had, or maybe he was hungover. Jake shrugged, counting out the change. But something scratched inside, and there was this smell from the driver. He didn't smell like diesel or a working man's sweat, but something musty, grave-like, like rotting earth in an abandoned cellar. The smell stuck in his nostrils, and Jake couldn't get rid of it for a long time, even after opening the door and airing out the cashier's booth. A couple of nights later, the story repeated with frightening accuracy. Another car, an ancient Buick of indeterminate, dirty gray color with a dented fender and a crack in the windshield. But the driver was almost an exact copy of the previous one. The same deathly pallor, the same empty, sunken eyes, the same silent purchase of 10 gallons of regular in a gas can, and the same nauseating smell. Dampness, decay. A sharp chemical note elusively reminiscent of ozone after a strong thunderstorm, or formaldehyde from the anatomy lab at college. Jake shuddered noticeably when the Buick, coughing a couple of times with its burnt-out muffler, disappeared into the darkness. He grabbed a can of air freshener, Ocean Breeze, and generously sprayed it throughout the room. The acrid chemical aroma temporarily overpowered the earthy stench, but somewhere in his subconscious, it was still felt. And then, a night later, a woman appeared. And this was really strange. She came on foot from the direction of the forest. To the nearest village, the rundown settlement of Millbrook, it was 5 miles in a straight line through the thicket, and there was no normal road from there to the highway. Who would trudge through the forest to the highway at night? The woman was dressed in some old-fashioned dark dress, long almost to the ground. Despite the fact that the night was quite warm, she didn't go to the gas station building, but stopped dead in her tracks at the far gas pump, right under the bright lamp, and just stared at the illuminated store. Jake felt an unpleasant chill run down his spine, and the hair on his arms stood on end. Her face in the deathly light of the lamp seemed like a mask of gray, unhealthy wax, and her eyes. Lord, her eyes. They were light, almost whitish, and absolutely empty. No pupils, no irises, just 2 milky white spots like a blind statue. But Jake felt in his gut that she could see him, was looking right at him through the glass, through the distance. She stood like that for 5 minutes, maybe longer, absolutely motionless, not stirring, like a mannequin. Then, just as silently, without a single sound, she turned and stepped back into the darkness of the forest, instantly dissolving in it as if she had never been there. Jake jumped up and turned the key in the entrance door lock twice. His heart was pounding so hard it echoed in his temples. Fatigue, nerves, hallucinations from lack of sleep and caffeine. He poured himself a full plastic cup of cold coffee from the thermos. His hands were noticeably shaking, coffee spilled on the counter. He tried to return to his textbook, to find salvation in dry facts about media ethics, but the letters jumped and blurred before his eyes. The image of the woman with terrible white eyes, standing motionless under the lamp, wouldn't leave his head. The next night, closer to 2 in the morning, another wreck rolled into the gas station. A rattling Oldsmobile of indeterminate, faded color. Two people got out of it, a man and a woman. Both were dressed in some baggy dark clothing, and both were copies of each other and those previous customers. Unnaturally pale faces like drowned people, and empty dark eyes staring into nowhere. They moved strangely, somehow jerkily, abruptly, like poorly oiled mechanisms or puppets on strings. Approaching the cashier's window, the woman silently held out a crumpled, damp-to-the-touch $100 bill. The man poked a long, pale finger at the cigarette display, pointing to the cheapest brand, unfiltered basics. Jake took the money, trying with all his might not to touch her fingers, but their hands still touched for a moment. Icy cold struck his skin, and the woman's skin itself felt strange to the touch. Smooth, cold, and elastic, like rubber or soft plastic. Jake jerked his hand back as if burned, threw the pack of basics and change onto the metal tray. The couple, just as silently, without uttering a sound, took the cigarettes and money, turned around, and shuffling their feet on the asphalt, trudged to their rattling Oldsmobile. The car started with a strained screech, and without turning on headlights, slowly drove away toward the city. On the counter, where their damp bill had lain, there remained a barely noticeable residue of something gray, similar to fine metallic dust or ash. Jake squeamishly wiped it away with a wet napkin. The smell of damp earth again filled the cashier's area. Now he began to notice details, systematize his observations, as they taught at journalism school when working with sources. These night customers never looked at their reflection in the glass door or in the mirror surface of the cooler display. They moved almost silently. Even the gravel under their feet barely crunched, as if they were floating above the ground. Their cars were always old, rusty, falling apart on the move. American models from the 70s and 80s mostly. They approached and left almost always with headlights off or dimly glowing parking lights, emerging from the darkness and dissolving back into it like ghosts. And always this smell. Dense, heavy smell of damp grave earth, sometimes mixed with a sharp chemical undertone of formaldehyde or something else indefinable that made his throat itch. He remembered the previous shift worker, Frank Thompson, an elderly man who had worked here before him and quit suddenly, citing health issues. Maybe he knew something. Jake found his number in an old notebook left in the back room and called during the day before his shift. "Hello, Frank. This is Jake. I work at your old spot at the Quick Stop." "Oh, Jake, hey there." The voice on the other end was tired, a little shaky. "What's up? Something happened?" No, everything's fine. I just wanted to ask, you worked here for a long time. Did you notice anything strange at night? You know, unusual customers or something else?" There was a pause on the line. Jake could hear heavy breathing from Frank. "Strange?" he finally asked. "Yeah, this whole highway is strange, kid, especially at night. All kinds of folks drive through, and some things you're better off not looking at too closely. Lock up tight after midnight, and with those who come from the forest, don't even try to chat. Understand?" From the forest, Jake's blood ran cold. "What do you mean they come?" "All sorts of things happen," Frank answered evasively. "You do what I said, and everything will be fine. And if things go really wrong, don't try to be a hero. Life is more precious. All right, gotta go, no time." And he hung up, leaving Jake with even more questions and growing anxiety. On one of the following shifts, closer to 3 in the morning, that same rusty pickup drove up again. Behind the wheel sat the same guy with black voids instead of eyes. As usual, he silently held out a gas can and money. Jake, already almost used to these visits, but still feeling a sticky chill run down his spine, filled him 10 gallons of regular. When he was returning the change, the man suddenly spoke. His voice was quiet, dry, and creaky, like rusty door hinges or the rustle of dry leaves. Soon everyone will need a lot," he croaked. His thin, bloodless lips stretched into a ghastly semblance of a smile, revealing a row of unnaturally even, too white teeth. A lot. Need a lot of what? Jake couldn't help but ask, although his survival instinct screamed, "Be quiet, don't talk to him." "Fuel," the stranger whispered. His empty black eyes seemed to drill right into Jake's soul. "Fuel for the crossing, for those who wait." He paused, tilting his head to the side as if listening to something inaudible to Jake. "You'll do," he added in the same creaky whisper. "Your spark is suitable." Jake felt the hair on the back of his neck literally stand on end, and a wave of icy horror ran through his body. What crossing? What spark? What does "you'll do" mean? He silently, trying not to look into those terrible eyes, shoved the change into the outstretched hand. Again, that disgusting sensation of cold, lifeless, rubber-like skin, and hurriedly slammed the cashier's window shut. The man stood for another moment, not taking his empty gaze off him. Then slowly, as if reluctantly, trudged to his rusty truck. When the pickup, without turning on headlights, dissolved into the night darkness, Jake noticed on the asphalt where the stranger had just stood several dry, blackened leaves. Definitely oak leaves. In the middle of August, fear stopped being just background anxiety or an unpleasant premonition. It became tangible, cold, and sticky, settling somewhere under his ribs and squeezing his chest with icy clamps. Jake no longer doubted it. These weren't just strange people, not drunks or crazy people. This was something else, something alien, wrong, hostile, coming from the night forest under cover of darkness. He checked the locks on the doors and windows again, drew the thick curtains on the window in the back room where there was an old couch and a kettle. In the toolbox, he found the heaviest wrench, probably 1.5 pounds, and placed it next to the cash register. Until dawn, there were still almost 2 hours left. The longest, darkest, and most frightening hours of his life. He could no longer force himself to even look at the textbook. He sat at the cash register, gripping the cold steel of the wrench with whitened fingers, and tensely listened to the sounds of the night outside, flinching at every rustle, expecting the next visit from the night customers. His brightly lit gas station no longer seemed like a safe refuge in the middle of darkness. Now it felt like a trap, a brightly lit stage on which he was the only actor, locked up and watched from the impenetrable, hostile darkness teeming with something unimaginable. He felt with every cell of his skin that soon the next act of this terrible performance would begin, and he would be in the leading role. The night thickened, becoming almost tangible, dense like black velvet. The air froze, heavy and motionless, as if before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear, strewn with indifferent cold stars. Even the restless crickets in the roadside grass fell silent, as if nature itself held its breath in anticipation of something terrible and inevitable. Jake sat at the cash register, not taking his eyes off the boundary between light and darkness outside the window. The heavy wrench lay on the counter, its cold steel providing some comfort, giving an illusion of protection. But the guy understood that against these creatures, a piece of iron was weak help. The clock on the wall impassively showed 3:30 in the morning, the deepest, darkest time before dawn. The tension was building. From the darkness of the forest came strange sounds, but not the crack of branches or quiet shuffling, but some muffled muttering in an unknown language. Jake listened, trying to make out the sounds, but they were too quiet, too distant, and too wrong. He approached the window, peering into the blackness between the trees. Did it seem like there, in the depths, two dim lights flickered, similar to eyes, or was it just a play of light and shadow? Suddenly, all the bright lamps above the pumps, above the signs, above the entrance blinked once, twice, with some dry electrical crack, and then went out all at once. At the same time, the rumbling refrigerators fell silent. The cash register screen went dark, and giving a quiet death squeak, the gas station plunged into thick, oppressive twilight. Only the emergency lighting was working. One dim bulb above the cash register and another above the entrance, casting trembling, distorted shadows on the walls and creating a sense of the irrationality of what was happening. Jake was doused with icy sweat. He rushed to the landline phone on the wall, short, frequent beeps. The line was dead. He pulled his cell phone from his jeans pocket. The display showed a crossed-out antenna. No signal. His heart sank somewhere in the region of his heels. This didn't look like the usual power outages that sometimes happened on the highway during strong thunderstorms or hurricanes. This was deliberate, ominous. He ran to the main window, pressed his forehead to the cold glass, peering toward the highway. Maybe an accident on the power lines. But no, in the distance, the lights of rare cars rushing along the highway in both directions were visible. Their headlights shone brightly without interruption. The electricity was cut off only here, only at his gas station, only on this small, now dimly lit patch of land squeezed between the highway and the hostile dark forest. And then from the darkness, from the direction of the forest, came a loud, dry crack, similar to a gunshot or the sound of a tree breaking under enormous weight. Jake flinched and strained his hearing. The sound repeated, a little closer, accompanied by a heavy rumble and the rustle of falling leaves. He cautiously, trying not to make noise, crept to the window facing the side access road, the one that led toward the forest and the nearest village. His pupils dilated with horror. Right across the road, completely blocking the exit, lay a huge tree. An old, gnarled oak, which he was sure hadn't been there an hour ago. Its mighty trunk was broken at the very base, as if it had been snapped in half by a giant invisible hand. There had been no wind, the sky was clear. Coincidence? Jake didn't believe in that for a second. He was trapped, finally and irrevocably. The trap had snapped shut. An icy wave of panic rose to his throat, threatening to overwhelm him. He rushed around the tiny storeroom like a trapped animal. The door was locked with two reliable locks. The main window was protected by an old but still strong metal grate. But in the back room, there was another window, smaller, also with a grate, but facing the backyard, toward the tilted wooden toilet and rusty garbage cans. He rushed there, feverishly pulling the handle of the back room door. The grate on that window was flimsy, he remembered. It was held by rusted bolts that should have been replaced long ago. With a jerk, he threw open the back room door, froze on the threshold, and then he saw them. They were coming out of the forest, not one by one or in pairs as before, but in a whole procession. Slowly, silently, like shadows, they floated out from behind the trees. 10, 15, maybe even 20 figures. Silent, dark silhouettes against the black wall of the forest. They moved slowly, but inexorably, spreading around the perimeter of the gas station, surrounding it from all sides, stopping exactly at the border of the dim light of the emergency lamps, as if not daring to cross it. In the weak, trembling lighting, their pale faces seemed even more inhuman, deathly gray, and their dark or whitish eyes glowed with some inner cold, malevolent fire. Their movements had become different. The angular stiffness had disappeared. Now they moved smoothly, but at the same time predatorily, like a pack of wolves driving prey. They no longer tried to pretend to be people. The masks were dropped. Jake recoiled from the back room window, his back pressed against the cold metal shelf with cans of motor oil and antifreeze. His breathing caught, blood pounded in his ears. They knew he was here, they had surrounded him, they had come for him. But why? What did they want? "You'll do, your spark is suitable," echoed in his head the creaky words of that pickup driver. Suitable for what? What were they going to do? From outside came a quiet scraping of gravel, then another, closer. They began to approach the building. Jake darted back to the main hall, to the entrance door, peered through the peephole. Right in front of the door, just a couple of meters away, stood that same woman in a dark, old-fashioned dress with terrible whitish eyes. She wasn't knocking, wasn't pulling the door handle. She just stood motionless and looked straight into the peephole. Her face was so close that Jake could make out nightmarish details. Her skin wasn't just pale. It was gray, dry, parchment-like in appearance, covered with a whole network of thin, dark veins, like on dragonfly wings or on a dried autumn leaf. And her eyes, they pulsed weakly from within, with a deathly, milky white light. From her motionless figure came all the same suffocating smell of damp grave earth and formaldehyde. But now it had become so concentrated that Jake's eyes watered and nausea rose to his throat. Jake jumped back from the door, covering his mouth with his hands so as not to scream. That's it, the end. The pretense was finally over. They were no longer night customers, they were hunters, and he was game, cornered on this cursed, dimly lit island in the middle of a night nightmare. A screech was heard, first quiet, uncertain, then louder, more insistent. They were trying the door. Someone slowly, methodically pulled the handle, checking the lock. Someone else scraped on the metal surface of the door with something sharp, nails or something worse. Then there was a dull blow to the glass of the main window. The glass plaintively clinked, but the thick safety glass held. Another blow, stronger, and another. A web of cracks slowly crept across the entire surface, distorting the view of the dark area outside. Jake frantically grabbed the first plastic canister from the shelf. It seemed to be blue windshield washer fluid, and stood opposite the window, ready to splash the caustic liquid at anyone who tried to squeeze inside through the broken glass. A nasty screeching sound came from the direction of the back room too. They had started working there as well, trying to bend or break out the flimsy grate on the back window. The siege had begun in earnest. Jake's brain worked feverishly, going through options. What to do, how to defend himself. A wrench against a dozen of these creatures seemed laughable protection. Fire extinguisher. In the corner of the trading hall stood a large red carbon dioxide cylinder. He dragged it closer to the door. What else? Gasoline. In the back room, there was an almost full 5-gallon canister of premium that he used for calibrating the pumps. And a lighter was always in his pocket, a smoker's habit. even though he had quit a couple of months ago. Using gasoline and fire inside the building was pure suicide. But if they broke through, this might be the last chance. Salt, he remembered Frank's words and some scraps of rural superstitions heard from his grandmother in childhood. On the shelf with related goods, there was an open pack of small paper packets of salt that were usually given away with hot dogs. He quickly tore open all the packets, about 10 pieces, and with trembling hands scattered salt in a thin white line along the threshold of the entrance door, and on the window sills of both windows. Stupidity, superstition, maybe. But now he was ready to clutch at any straw, believe in anything. Again, a strong, deafening blow to the main window. The glass cracked and with a loud ringing, showered inside with small fragments. The grate still held, but through the formed gaps between the bars, a hand immediately thrust through. Pale, almost bluish, with unnaturally long, thin fingers and blackened sharp nails, more like the claws of a bird or lizard. The skin on the hand was smooth, wet, and shiny, as if covered with a layer of transparent slime. The hand began to fumble around the inner side of the window, trying to find the latch or reach him. Jake, overcoming a fit of nausea and primal horror, jumped to the window, and with all his strength brought down the heavy wrench on the disgusting limb. There was a revolting wet crunch, as if not a bone had broken, but a bundle of wet twigs. The hand jerked convulsively and immediately disappeared from the gap. From outside immediately came a low, guttural, gurgling sound, not like a human moan or animal growl. Something in between, absolutely alien and inexpressibly creepy. Looks like he angered them. The blows on the door and windows became more furious, more frequent, more chaotic. A loud screech of bending metal was heard. They had clearly doubled their efforts, trying to bend or break out the grate on the back room window. Jake understood that he wouldn't last long like this. The cursed dim light of the emergency, lighting through his own huge jerking shadow on the walls, turning the small gas station store into a trap, into a cage surrounded by a hungry, many-faced nightmare. Until the saving dawn, there was still more than an hour left. A whole eternity, the longest and most terrible eternity of his life. And he had to survive, had to find a way to stop these creatures hiding in the darkness of the night forest, had to hold out until the first ray of sun, if the sun meant anything to them at all. This question hung like a sword of Damocles in the air of the store, adding another fat stroke to the canvas of his despair. Time had finally lost its normal course, stretching into a viscous, suffocating substance, where every second echoed in his ears with the dull beat of his heart and the screech of metal outside. The incessant blows and screeching would subside for agonizing moments, making Jake flinch at every rustle and tensely peer into the darkness outside the window. Then they would resume with renewed, doubled fury. He rushed between the main hall and the back room like a cornered animal in a cramped cage. In one hand, he frantically squeezed the heavy red fire extinguisher cylinder. In the other, the wrench, which had already become like an extension of his hand. The canister of gasoline and lighter stood at the ready, by the very door as the last desperate argument. In the back room, things were going very badly. The creatures had almost managed to bend the lower bars of the old grate. Through the formed narrow gap, you could already freely stick your hand. Jake watched with horror as pale, gnarled fingers with black claws appeared in the opening, scraping along the concrete windowsill, leaving wet, shiny, slimy traces behind them from which came a nauseating smell of swamp mud and something else disgustingly sweet, like the smell of beginning to rot flesh. He remembered the salt again, poured the last grains from the paper packets right onto the windowsill, onto the slimy traces and the fingers reaching for him. There was a loud hissing, similar to water dripping on a hot frying pan. Acrid smoke rose from the slime, and the fingers withdrew with incredible speed back into the darkness. From outside again came that same guttural, gurgling sound, full of pain and rage. Salt, exactly, they're afraid of salt, a saving thought flashed in Jake's head. But there was pitifully little salt, just a few miserable packets. This wouldn't stop them, only delay them for some time. He needed something else, something more effective. Light. He remembered they always stayed at the very border of light, even this dim emergency lighting. Maybe bright, concentrated light was unpleasant or even dangerous to them. He frantically rummaged through the desk drawer in the back room where all sorts of junk was stored. There it was, an old but powerful battery flashlight that Frank used to use. Jake pressed the dynamo handle several times with force, and the flashlight blazed with a bright white beam. He directed it at the back room window, where the fingers had just been. The beam snatched from the darkness for one short moment a figure standing very close. What he saw made him stagger and step back, almost dropping the flashlight. This creature already had almost nothing in common with a human. It stood on half-bent, unnaturally twisted backward legs, resembling the limbs of an insect or spider. Its clothing, similar to decayed rags, barely covered gray-green, bumpy, wetly glistening skin, covered with something like dark mold or lichen. Its head was strangely thrown back, and instead of a face, there was only a smooth, stretched gray surface, with 3 chaotically located vertical dark slits from which some viscous dark liquid slowly oozed. Seeing the light, the creature let out a high, vibrating, screeching sound that made his ears ring, and sharply recoiled, clumsily hiding in the saving darkness around the corner of the building. Light, they were afraid of bright light. Another clue, another grain of hope. But the flashlight was battery-powered. The dynamo required constant recharging, and his strength might not be enough for that. And the beam was too narrow to drive them all away. Meanwhile, the blows on the entrance door became even stronger, even more insistent. It seemed like they were hitting it with something heavy and blunt, a stone or a thick branch. The steel sheets began to noticeably deform inward. The locks were holding on by their last strength, but it was clear they wouldn't last long. Jake, with his last strength, dragged a heavy metal shelf with 5-gallon bottles of drinking water to the door, creating an additional improvised barricade. And then it dawned on him again. Gasoline and a lighter. Dangerous, yes, insanely dangerous. He could burn himself and the entire gas station to hell. But this was a chance, a real chance to stop them or at least scare them. If they were afraid of light, then open fire, bright and hot, should scare them even more, or maybe even cause serious harm to their strange bodies. He decided. Carefully, he unscrewed the cap of the 5-gallon gasoline canister. The sharp, acrid smell hit his nose, momentarily overpowering the disgusting stench of decay and dampness coming from outside. It was at this moment that the glass in the main window, already covered with cracks, finally gave way under another powerful blow. With a deafening ringing and crash, it flew inside, showering half the trading hall with a rain of small, sharp fragments. The metal grate still held, but the bars in the center noticeably bent inward. Through them, two hands immediately thrust, one still the same pale, scaly, and the other already completely inhuman. Thick, shapeless, covered with gray-green pulsating slime and some growths. They fumbled inside, writhing like snakes, trying to reach him, the cash register, anything. Jake acted almost on autopilot, driven by pure adrenaline and the animal horror of survival. He splashed some gasoline from the canister right onto the floor in front of the window, creating a small, quickly spreading puddle. Then, holding the heavy fire extinguisher under his arm and gripping the flashlight, he pulled out his old metal Zippo lighter from his pocket. He struck the flint once, twice, sparks flew, but the flame wouldn't catch. His hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't hold the wheel and wick at the same time. The creatures behind the window hissed louder. Their movements became even faster and more furious. One of the hands, the one covered with slime, almost reached his leg. "Come on, damn it, light up, you piece of crap," Jake hissed through gritted teeth, striking the wheel again. Finally, a tiny yellow flame flared on the wick. Without thinking for a second, he brought it to the puddle of gasoline. The flame shot up instantly, bright, hot, with a roaring sound, illuminating the entire store and the area in front of it with blinding orange light. At the same second, a deafening multi-voiced shriek rang out from outside, high, ear-piercing, inhuman, full of unbearable pain and primal rage. The hands reaching through the grate, engulfed in flames, jerked convulsively away. From outside came the dull sounds of several bodies falling on the asphalt, loud hissing, gurgling, and the disgusting smell of burned flesh mixed with the smell of gasoline, and all the same damp earth. The fire on the floor quickly burned out, leaving behind a black, smoking stain on the linoleum. But the effect was achieved. The blows on the door and walls instantly stopped. From outside reigned a dead, deafening silence that seemed to Jake even more terrible than the previous roar and screech. He stood in the middle of the devastated store, breathing heavily, drenched in sweat, and sweeping the flashlight beam from side to side. They had retreated or just hidden, preparing for a new attack. He slowly, on unsteady legs, approached the broken window. The flashlight beam felt around the asphalt outside. No one, only dark, oily, smoking stains on the asphalt where the burning creatures had fallen, and several charred, smoking scraps of something that used to be clothing or skin. And dry leaves, many dry, blackened oak leaves were scattered everywhere, as if an autumn hurricane had swept through here. Jake didn't allow himself to relax for a second. He waited, listened to every rustle, but around there was only silence, broken only by the whistle of the wind that suddenly rose and rustled in the branches of trees beyond the road. And then he noticed it. A thin, barely noticeable strip on the eastern horizon above the dark ridge of the forest began to lighten, acquiring a pale gray-blue tint. Dawn. Saving dawn. He had held out, he had survived. As the sky in the east blazed brighter and brighter, the tension gradually released Jake, leaving behind a ringing emptiness in his head and a coarse tremor throughout his body. His legs buckled, and he simply slid to the floor, leaning his back against the cold metal of the cash register, and closed his eyes. But before him still stood the nightmarish images of this night. Pale waxy faces, empty black or whitish eyes, gnarled clawed fingers, hands covered with slime. and that terrible faceless creature with 3 slits that he had seen in the light of the flashlight. When the first direct rays of the rising sun touched the asphalt of the gas station, something strange and inexplicable happened. The dark, oily stains on the asphalt left by the creatures' bodies began to quickly smoke, hiss, and disappear, as if evaporating under the sunlight. The dry black leaves scattered everywhere also crumbled into fine gray dust, which was immediately picked up and scattered by the morning wind. Even the disgusting smell of decay and dampness became noticeably weaker, giving way to fresh, cool morning air with the scent of pine and dusty road. Jake sat like that on the floor for probably about an hour, until it was completely light and the sun rose above the forest. The highway gradually came to life. The first morning cars began to rush by. He struggled to his feet on cotton, disobedient legs and surveyed the devastated store. Broken glass, a bent grate, dents on the door, traces of struggle, a burned floor, empty canisters, a discarded fire extinguisher, a wrench, and himself, pale as a sheet, with wild eyes inflamed from sleeplessness and horror, in dirty, burned clothing smelling of smoke and fear. Soon a police car drove up, called apparently by one of the drivers passing by, who had noticed the broken window, the fallen tree, and the clearly inadequate guy staggering around the gas station territory. 2 tired policemen, a captain and a sergeant, got out of the car. Jake, stumbling and gesticulating, tried to explain to them what had happened. He talked about strange night customers in old cars, about their terrible appearance, about the sudden power and communication outage, about the siege, about creatures from the forest, about fire. The police listened to him silently, with stone faces on which poorly concealed disbelief and fatigue could be read. They exchanged glances, shook their heads. They saw before them a clearly sleep-deprived, scared to death student, a devastated gas station, and a tree that had fallen from old age. A version of robbery with attempted arson, or simply drunk debauchery and vandalism, seemed much more plausible to them than a crazy story about some night monsters from the forest. So you're saying there were many of them, 15 to 20 people? The captain clarified, writing something in his notebook. And all terrible, pale, with black eyes, and they came out of the forest. Yes, they wanted to break in. They were breaking the door, the windows. I fought them off, look. Jake showed the damage. And where did they go then? Evaporated, the sergeant asked with a slight smirk, examining the asphalt. No tracks, no shell casings, nothing. They disappeared with dawn, the sun destroyed them. Only dust remained, Jake desperately tried to explain. I see, the captain sighed. So dust, let's write that down. Full name, address, where do you study? They drew up a report, carefully recorded his confused testimony. But Jake could read obvious disbelief and suspicion in their eyes. Either the guy had hit the bottle hard, or he was overtired and his mind had snapped, and he was seeing all sorts of devilry. Or maybe he had wrecked everything here himself and was now telling fairy tales. Jake realized no one believed him. Yes, standing here under the bright morning sun, he himself had trouble believing in the reality of the nightmare he had experienced. Everything seemed surreal, impossible. But the tremor in his hands that wouldn't go away, the acrid smell of burning embedded in his clothes, and the image frozen before his eyes of the faceless creature with slits instead of a face, were too real to be just a hallucination. He quit the gas station that same day, as soon as the owner arrived. a grim man who was more upset about the losses than interested in the condition of his employee. Jake hastily gathered his few belongings from the back room, stuffed his investigative journalism textbook that he never finished reading into his backpack, and without looking back, walked on foot along the highway shoulder toward the nearest bus stop. He got on the first bus going to the city and left, away from this cursed place, trying not to look out the window at the dark, ominous forest passing by. When the bus was driving away, for a moment it seemed to him that at the very edge of the forest, where the territory of the now abandoned gas station began, a dark, motionless figure stood and watched him go. But perhaps it was just a play of light and shadow on the retina of tired eyes. Was all this hallucinations, or did the main character really fight with corpses that came out of the forest and wanted to do something terrible? That's for you to decide. And if you listened to the story to the very end, let us know in the comments. We'll see how many of us listened to the story to the very end. We'll hear from you, as always, in the next terrifyingly interesting story. There are things you can't tell anyone, not because they're secrets, but because you'll sound like a complete lunatic. I'm telling you this story because I don't know. Maybe you'll believe me, or maybe I just need to get it out before I completely lose my mind. It all started with tamales. Ridiculous, right? Freaking tamales in our old brick apartment building on the south side of Chicago. The building was one of those 4-story walk-ups from the 1920s. All cracked mortar and rusted fire escapes, squeezed between a laundromat and a corner store that sold expired milk. Mrs. Martinez lived in apartment 2A on the first floor. Quiet little old lady, probably in her 70s, with silver hair always pulled back in a neat bun, and these deep brown eyes that seemed to see right through you. She looked like hundreds of other elderly Latina women you'd see at the grocery store or waiting for the bus. Wrinkled hands, faded floral dresses, always carrying a worn leather purse. But she had one peculiarity. Every Thursday, exactly from 4 to 6 in the evening, she sold tamales. And these weren't just any tamales. These were something divine. The masa was perfectly steamed, light as clouds. The filling was rich and complex, whether it was pork with red chilies or chicken with green salsa. The aroma would drift up through the entire building, seeping under doors and through cracks in the walls. Your mouth would start watering even if you just finished dinner. But there was a second peculiarity, much stranger than the first. Mrs. Martinez never took money, ever. Payment for her culinary masterpieces consisted of old, broken things. That's right. You brought her some piece of junk, you got a bag of hot, steaming tamales. People were surprised at first, then they got used to it. Who doesn't have broken stuff lying around their apartment? So every Thursday, they dragged down whatever they could find. Someone would bring a cracked picture frame, someone else a broken alarm clock, maybe a lamp with a busted cord. She'd silently accept payment, nod with her bird-like face, and hand over a wrapped bundle. I got into this routine too. How could I not? I was a community college student living in a cramped studio apartment. Free food was a gift from heaven. And those tamales, damn it, were the best I'd ever had in my life. I brought her all kinds of stuff. A burned-out light bulb, a torn shoelace, an old cassette tape with the ribbon all tangled up. She took everything without question. Her apartment, number 2A, was always locked tight, and what she did with all that junk, nobody knew. Some people joked that she was opening portals to another dimension. Others said she'd just gone crazy from loneliness. I didn't care. The tamales were what mattered. That Thursday, everything went wrong. It was a miserable November day. Low, leaden sky pressed down on the rooftops, and cold drizzle turned the streets into dirty mirrors reflecting the gray world above. Coming back from classes, tired and hungry, I was already anticipating my weekly dose of happiness. I rummaged through my desk drawer where I usually kept random broken stuff and realized it was empty. Everything I could possibly bring, I'd already brought. My stomach betrayed me with a loud growl, and I could almost smell that phantom aroma of corn masa and spiced meat. I had to frantically search the apartment for anything at all. Old phones still worked. Headphones still played music. Everything, as if to spite me, was in perfect working order. Then my gaze fell on my dresser. There, among various small items, lay a small silver locket on a tarnished chain. It had belonged to my great-grandfather. He'd carried it his whole life. I barely remembered him. He died when I was really young, but somehow the locket had ended up with me. It was old, well-worn, and most importantly, right down the middle of the front ran a thin crack like a spider's web. Taking it in my hands, I felt the cold metal unpleasantly chill my palm. When I opened it, there was a tiny photograph of a stern-looking man in a military uniform, my great-grandfather from World War II. The crack ran right through his face, splitting the image in two. Perfect, I thought. Something old and broken, just what she needs. Some little voice inside whispered that this wasn't right family history, you know. But hunger and the smell of tamales quickly drowned out that whisper of conscience. Shoving the locket into my pocket, I hurried downstairs to the first floor. The door to apartment 2A was, as always, slightly ajar. Warm air drifted out, carrying that divine aroma. I knocked softly. "Mrs. Martinez," I called quietly. The door creaked and opened wider. In the dim hallway, cluttered with bags and boxes, she stood. Today she looked different somehow. Usually her eyes, small and faded, were indifferent, but today they held some strange, living spark. "You brought something?" she rasped without greeting me. "Yes," I nodded and held out the locket. She didn't take it immediately. Instead, she gripped my hand with her dry fingers that felt like bird claws and pulled it closer to her face, into the dim light from the kitchen. Her gaze was fixed on the cracked photograph. She studied it as if seeing not my great-grandfather, but something else. Something important, hidden behind the silver. A strange, unsettling smile appeared on her lips, revealing uneven yellow teeth. A chill ran down my spine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Good," she finally wheezed. "Very good. Haven't had one like this in a long time." She carefully took the locket from my palm with 2 fingers, then did something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She brought it to her lips, and looking not at me, but directly at the cracked photograph of my great-grandfather, whispered into the metal, "We'll see each other soon." Then she shoved the locket somewhere into the pocket of her stained apron, turned, and disappeared into the kitchen. A second later, she returned with a hefty paper bag that radiated such heat I could barely hold it. "Go," she said curtly, and slammed the door right in my face. I stood there in the dim hallway that reeked of dampness and cats, my heart pounding like crazy. What was that about? Who was she talking to? To my great-grandfather's photograph. Pure nonsense. The old woman had just lost her marbles, that's all. Shaking my head to dispel the strange feeling, I caught the aroma of tamales that brought me back to reality. Hot, delicious, free. I decided to forget this weird episode. Back in my apartment, I poured myself some coffee and hungrily attacked the food. The tamales were, as always, magnificent, maybe even better than usual. After eating 3 in a row, I felt pleasant, satisfied warmth spread through my body. The strange incident with the locket began to seem silly and insignificant. So she said something strange. Who knows what goes through an old lady's mind? Finishing my coffee, I went to my room. My laptop was closed, its black screen looking like a piece of dark ice. Glancing at it casually, I froze. For just a split second, one tiny, imperceptible moment, it seemed like my reflection in the screen was delayed. I'd already turned my head, but it was still looking straight ahead. I blinked. No, everything was fine. There it was, my face, following all my movements. Must have imagined it. Just tired, nerves shot from studying and lack of sleep. Smirking at my own paranoia, I sat down at my desk. I woke up in the night to a strange sensation. The room was absolutely dark and quiet, but I felt someone's gaze on me. You know that sticky, unpleasant feeling when someone's staring at you. Slowly opening my eyes, I saw moonlight barely filtering through the blinds, painting pale patterns on the wall. My gaze swept the room. Closet, desk, chair with clothes piled on it. Nobody there. Turning over to face the wall, I heard it. A quiet, rustling sound. It came from the direction of the closet, where a large mirror hung on its polished door. The rustling sounded like someone running fingernails across glass. Very slowly, scritch, scritch. I froze, afraid to breathe. My heart plummeted somewhere into my boots. Mice. No, the sound was different. It was deliberate. The rustling stopped. Deafening silence fell. Pressed into the mattress, I listened to the darkness, and in that silence I heard a whisper. It was barely audible, thinner than a mosquito's whine, and it was in my own voice. Soon rustled from the corner where the closet stood. Sitting up abruptly in bed, I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, turned on the flashlight, and aimed the beam at the closet. The bright light pulled the polished door from the darkness. There was nothing on it except my own frightened reflection, squinting in the harsh light. No scratches, nobody there. I sat like that for probably 10 minutes, not taking my eyes off the mirror. Then I slowly got up and approached it. I ran my hand over the cold glass. Smooth, clean, no traces. I'm having hallucinations, I decided. Definitely stress-related from overwork. It happens. Returning to bed, I couldn't fall asleep anymore. I lay with open eyes until morning, and the whole time it felt like someone was watching me from the mirror. Someone very much like me, waiting. The next few days passed in a fog. I slept poorly, constantly jumping at any sound. Strange things started happening. Small things, almost unnoticeable, but no less creepy for that. I could have sworn I left a book on the desk, but found it on the windowsill. Keys that always hung on the hook by the door turned up in my jacket pocket. At first I blamed it all on my own absent-mindedness. Everyone forgets things sometimes. But then something happened that couldn't be chalked up to forgetfulness. I was washing my face in the bathroom. I tried to avoid the mirror above the sink, looking sideways at the tile instead. After brushing my teeth and rinsing my mouth, I raised my head, and at that moment our gazes met. Mine and my reflections. It was looking at me, not just copying my movements. In its eyes was mockery, cold, evil mockery. And then, I swear, I saw it as clearly as I see you now. It winked at me with its right eye, very slowly and deliberately. Recoiling as if struck, I felt sick. I slid down the wall to the floor, my heart racing wildly in my chest. I sat on the cold tile and stared at the door, afraid to look up at the mirror again. This wasn't a hallucination. It was real. It had winked at me. From that moment, I started to be afraid. Not just nervous, but truly, panically afraid. I began avoiding any reflective surfaces. Turned off TV screens, windows at night, store windows, even puddles on the pavement. I had to walk down the street with my head down like some beaten psycho. It seemed like from every reflection it was watching me, my copy. And with each day, this copy looked more confident, more real than I was, and I, on the contrary, felt like I was fading. I became pale, dark circles appeared under my eyes, constant fatigue and apathy, as if life was being drained out of me. I called my only friend Jake. We'd stuck together since freshman year of community college. Jake, hey, listen, I've got this crazy situation, I began, trying to find the words. I told him everything. About the old lady, about the tamales, about her strange payment system, about the locket, about the whispers and the winking. I expected anything that he'd laugh, say I'd lost my mind, suggest I see a doctor. Jake was silent, listening very carefully. When I finished, the line hung silent for several seconds. "Tyler, where are you right now?" he finally asked. His voice was serious. "Home." "I'm coming over. Don't touch anything, just sit and wait for me. And listen, cover up every mirror in your place. All of them." His reaction surprised me. I thought he'd just tap his finger to his temple, but he believed me. An hour later, Jake was at my apartment. Coming in, he first looked around. His gaze lingered on the mirror I hadn't covered with a blanket. "Yeah," he said slowly. "You look like hell." We sat in the kitchen. He poured us both coffee. "So, Mrs. Martinez from the first floor," he clarified. "That's her. I've heard about her. My sister Rebecca lives in the building next door, but the whole neighborhood knows this lady. Said she was nuts too, used to bring her broken junk for tamales." Jake paused, choosing his words. "What happened then?" I urged him. "Then my sister started complaining that her things were disappearing. And then she started seeing herself in the window across the street. Said she'd be standing in her own apartment, looking at herself. Called the cops. They checked. Nobody there. Rebecca ended up moving back in with our parents in another city. Said her double was driving her out. A cold sweat broke out on me, so I wasn't the only one. What did she give her?" I asked, afraid to hear the answer. "A ceramic cat figurine. Had a broken ear." We sat in silence. Outside it was getting dark. Rain began drumming on the fire escape again. "So what do I do now?" My voice sounded pathetic. "I think we need to go see this old lady," Jake said firmly. "Demand explanations, and get your locket back." The thought of going back to apartment 2 made me sick, but Jake was right. I couldn't just sit and wait for this thing to completely push me out. Something had to be done. "Will you come with me?" I asked. "Of course," he nodded. "I'm not letting you go there alone." At that moment, something crashed loudly in the entryway. We both jumped. The sound was like something heavy and glass had fallen to the floor. We looked at each other. My heart started pounding wildly. "That was," I began, The mirror, Jake finished. Slowly, on tiptoe, we went to the hallway. The blanket I'd used to cover the closet was lying on the floor, and the mirror itself, it was intact, but it wasn't empty. In it stood me, or rather my copy. It was standing with its back to us, facing the depths of the mirror-world hallway, examining something on the wall. Then it slowly turned its head. On its face was my smile, but it was wrong, predatory. It looked directly at me, not at Jake, and said in my voice, only deeper and more confident, "I told you we'd see each other soon. Now get out. This is my apartment." Jake grabbed my hand and dragged me back to the kitchen. "Holy shit," he muttered. "I saw it, you saw it." "I saw it," I croaked, feeling my legs turn to jelly. We locked ourselves in the kitchen, leaning against the door. I tried to stop shaking. It was here, not just in a reflection. It was in my home. It was talking to us. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps. My footsteps. Then the front door lock clicked. The steps moved away down the stairwell. We sat in the kitchen until morning. Neither of us dared to leave, afraid it would come back or that it was somewhere out there behind the door, waiting. When the first gray rays of dawn broke through the window, we finally decided to take a look. The apartment was quiet. The mirror on the closet was empty. There was no blanket on the floor, no broken glass. Everything was as if nothing had happened, as if we'd both imagined it all. But I knew it wasn't so. And Jake knew it too. It had left, but I understood this was only the beginning. It had shown that it could come out of mirrors and that it wanted to take my place. And I didn't know how to stop it. The only person who might know something lived on the first floor. And now going to see her wasn't just scary, it was vital. The decision to go see Mrs. Martinez wasn't easy. Jake and I sat in the kitchen almost until noon, emptying the entire coffee pot and smoking half a pack of his cigarettes right out the window. The fear hadn't gone anywhere. It had just crouched down, turning into a cold, heavy lump in my stomach. Every creak, every sound from the building made us flinch. But inaction was even more frightening. The thought that my double was somewhere out there, walking the streets, maybe even talking to my acquaintances, was unbearable. "All right, enough," Jake finally said decisively, crushing his cigarette butt in the makeshift ashtray from a tin can. "Time to go. During the day, it probably won't show up." His confidence transferred to me a little. Together, it wasn't as scary. Leaving the apartment, I instinctively averted my gaze from the mirror in the entryway. Though out of the corner of my eye, I noticed it was completely normal. Empty. The building greeted us with familiar smells and dim lighting. We went down to the first floor. The door to apartment 2A was tightly closed. No aroma of tamales, no crack in the door. Just an old door covered in brown vinyl. Jake confidently pressed the doorbell button. The sound was rattling and unpleasant. We waited a minute or two. No reaction. "Maybe she's not home," I suggested hopefully. "Thursday was yesterday. She should be here." Jake objected and pressed the bell again, this time longer. Behind the door we heard shuffling, then the chain lock clinked. The door opened a crack and a familiar faded eye appeared in the gap. "What do you want?" Mrs. Martinez's voice creaked. "Today's not Thursday, no tamales." "We need to talk," Jake said firmly, stepping forward and not letting her close the door. "About the tamales and about payment, about what's happening." The eye in the gap narrowed. "Nothing to talk about. Go away." "We won't leave until you explain." I found the strength to speak up. And until you give me back my thing, the locket. Silence fell. Mrs. Martinez was quiet, only her eyes staring at me from behind the door. It seemed like I saw in them not anger, but something like fatigue or even hidden pity. "Fools," she finally whispered. "You're both fools. You can't take back what's already been given. I don't take it, it takes it." "Who is it?" Jake demanded an answer. "What kind of devilry have you set up here? People are going crazy because of you." "Quiet," she hissed. Her eye darted fearfully around the stairwell. "It will hear you." After hesitating, she removed the chain with a clank. "Come in quickly." We slipped inside and she immediately slammed the door behind us, locking all the locks. Mrs. Martinez's apartment was completely different from what I'd imagined. I expected to see the cluttered dwelling of a crazy old woman, but inside it was surprisingly empty. Bare walls, old linoleum on the floor, no furniture, no rugs. Only in the far corner of the hallway, some bags were piled up. The air was stale, smelling of dust, dry herbs, and something else unidentifiable, sickeningly sweet, like wilted flowers. Mrs. Martinez led us to the kitchen. It was just as empty as the entryway. An old gas stove, a table, and 2 stools. No dishes, no signs that anyone actually cooked here. Where did that maddening aroma of tamales come from every Thursday? I could only guess. "Tamales are bait," the old woman said, as if reading my thoughts. "The smell, too, so they'll bring things, so they'll feed it." "Feed what?" Jake sat on a stool, showing with his whole demeanor that we wouldn't leave without answers. Mrs. Martinez sighed heavily and lowered herself onto the second stool. Up close, she looked even more frightening and exhausted. "It lives in cracks, in chips, in breaks, in reflections. Call it what you want, the gatherer, the fragment entity. It has no name, it is hunger, hunger for life." She spoke quietly, monotonously, as if reciting a memorized text. "It's not from here. Came long ago when this building was constructed. They broke something big, very old. A mirror, they say, brought from some mansion. Huge, as tall as a person, and it broke free. At first it tried to take people whole. They disappear and never return. Then we figured out it could be fed. Give it small things so it wouldn't take big ones. Give it broken things so it wouldn't reach for whole ones." My brain refused to believe this nonsense, but what I'd seen yesterday in my apartment was far more insane. "And you feed it?" I asked. "I do. Before me there was another woman, and before her too. Someone has to, otherwise it gets out of control. Once a week on Thursday, I open a passage. Create bait so the smell goes out, so people come and bring their fragments. It takes the reflection from these things, takes the echo of memory that remains in them, and for a time it quiets down, gets satisfied." "And what happens to those who gave something?" Jake asked. "Depends on the thing," Mrs. Martinez interrupted. "The more of you that was in it, the more it wants. A broken cup, small matter. You might break dishes more often, that's all. An old cassette, maybe you'll forget a couple songs. But a locket," she looked directly at me. "A locket is the most dangerous, especially an old one, especially cracked. It's not just a thing, it's a portal. Your locket, boy, it's special. Not only your reflection was in it, but your great-grandfather's reflected there, and his father's. A whole lineage. It's soaked with memory. And the crack, that's a ready-made door. You didn't just give it a fragment. You gave it a key to your home and an invitation." "What is it?" I whispered. "My double." "That's not a double, that's it. It gathers itself from what it's given. from fragments of others' reflections, from scraps of others' memories. It wants to become whole, wants to become you. It will learn to copy your habits, your voice, your thoughts. And it will push you out until you turn into a pale shadow, a reflection in muddy water. And then you'll disappear entirely. But why did you say we'll see each other soon? You knew what would happen. I jumped up. Anger and fear wrestled inside me. What was I supposed to say? She looked at me without a shadow of emotion. I told the truth. You gave me yourself. Of course you'd see each other. I was just stating fact. My job is to feed the beast, not save idiots who stick their heads in its mouth. Her words hit like a slap. I sat back down, feeling completely crushed. Is there a way to stop this? Jake asked. There has to be. Mrs. Martinez shook her head. You can't take back what's given. It's already part of it. You could try to deceive it. Give it something more valuable than you, something whole. But it's cunning and hungry. What if we break all the mirrors? I suggested. Useless, she cut me off. It's not tied to your home anymore. It's tied to you. It will be in every puddle, in every shop window, in the pupils of every passerby. You'll see it everywhere, and then others will start seeing it instead of you. She stood up, making it clear the conversation was over. Leave, I've said everything I know. You're on your own now. My advice, go far away. Maybe it won't follow, though I'm not sure about that. She showed us to the hallway and opened the door. Before we left, I turned around. Mrs. Martinez, what did you give it? What did you give? For the first time, some emotion flickered on her face, something like infinite pain. I gave it the most precious thing I had, my daughter's laughter. She's alive, healthy, but she never laughs anymore. Now go. The door slammed shut. We emerged from the building, blinded by daylight. The world around us lived its life. Cars drove by, people hurried about their business. None of them knew that nearby, in cracks and fragments, lived hungry darkness. Jake and I walked in silence. Everything we'd learned didn't fit in our heads. It was like a cheap horror movie, but the fear was real to the point of nausea. Leave, I asked, breaking the silence. Where would you go? Jake reasonably replied. You barely have money for rent, and she said herself she's not sure it would help. It's tied to you. So what do I do? Sit and wait for it to devour me? No, Jake stopped and looked at me. We'll fight. You heard what she said. It can be deceived. Give it something more valuable, like your soul. Think, Tyler, think about what's valuable to it. Life, wholeness, memory. We need to find new bait for it. But what could we find that might be more valuable than a whole human life? We returned to my apartment. It was quiet, too quiet. Walking through all the rooms, I made sure things were in their places, but its invisible presence was felt in the air, as if it had become denser. Approaching the closet, I pulled off the blanket. My reflection was there, ordinary, frightened. I waved to it, it repeated. Made a face, it did too. Maybe Jake was right, and during the day it's not active, I thought. Several hours passed like this. I periodically approached the mirror and checked. Everything was normal. Fear began to recede little by little, replaced by dull, exhausting fatigue. I decided to lie down. I woke up to cold. The window in the room was wide open, curtains fluttering in the draft. Outside it was already deep night. Sitting up in bed, I saw it. It was sitting at my desk with its back to me, having turned on my desk lamp and reading my book. It was wearing my clothes. It wasn't just copying me, it was living my life. I froze, afraid to move. What to do? Scream? Run. It seemed to sense my gaze. Slowly, very slowly, it closed the book, placed it on the desk, and began to turn around. I saw its face in profile. It was my face, but it was perfect. No bags under the eyes, no traces of fatigue and fear. Confident, calm, the face of an owner. It turned completely and looked at me. A light smile played on its lips. Awake, it said in my voice. You sleep poorly lately, you should rest, forever. It stood up. In panic, I crawled back to the wall, looking around for something heavy. But there was nothing in reach except pillows and clothes. Don't be afraid, it took a step toward me. It won't hurt. You'll just dissolve, become an echo, a memory, and I'll live for both of us. It approached the bed and leaned over me. Squeezing my eyes shut, I expected the blow, cold hands on my throat, anything. But nothing happened. Opening my eyes, I saw it standing and just looking at me. Then it extended its hand. Give me, it said, give me what I saw in the mirror, your childhood, that day at the lake with your great-grandfather. Give me that memory. I'll leave you the rest. I didn't understand what it was talking about. What day? I barely remembered my great-grandfather. You remember, it interrupted. Deep inside, I saw it in the reflection. The brightest memory connected to that locket. Great-grandfather taking it out to make sunspots dance on the water, and you laughing. Give me that laughter, that joy. I looked into its eyes, my eyes, and understood it wasn't lying. It really wanted this. Not to kill me, but to take a piece of my soul. The brightest piece. At that moment, Jake appeared in the doorway. In his hands was a heavy cast-iron skillet from our kitchen. Get away from him, he yelled, and without hesitation, swung with all his strength at its head. The sound was disgusting. Not like hitting a person, but like breaking a bag of wet sand. The double staggered, its perfect face warping, flowing like melted wax. Turning to Jake, it flashed eyes that blazed with cold fury. Mistake, it hissed. It lunged at Jake. Breaking out of my stupor, I grabbed the desk lamp and hit it across the back with all my strength. The lamp shattered into pieces. The double didn't even sway. It grabbed Jake by the throat and lifted him like a feather. Jake wheezed, his legs kicking helplessly. No, I screamed and threw myself on the monster's back, trying to pull it away. It was like trying to move a wall. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, from the broken light bulb on the floor, the base had fallen out. Metallic, shiny, and in its tiny curved reflection I saw not our struggle, but something else. Mrs. Martinez's kitchen, herself. She stood at the stove making tamales, and next to her stood a little girl. And she was laughing. Where did this vision come from? As if the entity standing nearby was involuntarily broadcasting its most desired image to me. The purest memory it yearned to devour. Mrs. Martinez, I screamed, not knowing why. Her granddaughter or daughter, that's what you need. Her laughter. The double froze. Its grip on Jake's throat loosened. Slowly turning its head to me, it stared with eyes full of animal hunger. Where it croaked, dropping Jake aside. Jake collapsed to the floor, coughing and gasping for air. It fixed its attention on me. You know where she is? I was backing toward the window. I had no idea where this girl was, where this laughter was, but it seemed to believe me. Tell me, it moved toward me. I'll let you go. I'll take her and you'll be free. I understood it was a lie, but it was a chance to buy time. Backing up to the window, cold night air hit my back. Third floor, not high, but not low either. I began, my mind racing frantically. She's in her apartment, hidden in the very back bag, in that thing where you first heard her. It stopped. Doubt flickered across its face, but greed won out. It wanted this whole, untouched piece of life more than my already spoiled one, tainted by fear. Turning around, paying no more attention to us, it ran from the room. We heard the front door slam. We were alone. Jake lay on the floor, coming to his senses. I stood by the window, shaking all over. "Did you deceive it?" Jake croaked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I just saw something. Doesn't matter. We need to get out of here, right now." We understood it would soon realize the deception and return, and then it would be furious. We had to run, but where? And then a crazy idea came to mind. The only place it might not go immediately was the place where it had already been satisfied. Mrs. Martinez's apartment. Running to Mrs. Martinez was pure madness. It was like hiding from a wolf in its own den. But we saw no other way out. My apartment had become a death trap. Staying at Jake's was impossible. It knew who he was and would easily find him. The city streets with their endless shop windows, car windows, dark puddles seemed like a minefield of portals. Apartment 2A, the feeder's den, paradoxically seemed like the safest place. Bursting out of my apartment, we raced downstairs in our own building. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. There it was, Mrs. Martinez's door on the first floor. Just as silent as during the day, I pounded on it with my fists. "Mrs. Martinez, open up, it's Tyler, please." Silence. "It's coming back, it'll kill us," I shouted, no longer caring who heard me. "It's looking for her, your daughter or granddaughter," her laughter. Behind the door I heard shuffling, then an old voice full of hopelessness. "I told you to leave." It was at my place. It almost killed Jake. I saw her laughter, it wants it. I blurted out in one breath. Behind the door, everything went quiet. Such silence fell that I could hear blood roaring in my ears. Then the locks clanged and the door swung open. Mrs. Martinez stood on the threshold, pale as death. Her eyes were huge with terror. "What did you say?" I saw her in a reflection, a girl who laughs. "It wants her, and I said you have her." She grabbed my jacket with her bony hand and dragged us inside. "Idiots," she hissed, locking the door. "You've ruined everything. You let it right to her." Leading us to her empty kitchen, she lit the dim bulb. Her hands were shaking. "You shouldn't have made it angry," she muttered. "It needed to be fed little by little with fragments. And you provoked it. Now it won't want just a piece. It'll want everything." "But what did I see?" I asked. "That girl, Mrs." Martinez lowered her head. "That was my Maria, my daughter. She died before we even moved here. Fell from the monkey bars at the playground, hit her head on the concrete." Her voice cracked. Her laughter stayed in a little silver bell she was holding when she fell. It was the only thing that broke in the accident. The clapper came loose. She raised her tear-filled eyes to me. "I came here to become the keeper in exchange for leaving her memory in peace. I fed it her laughter from that bell as my first payment. Thought it would be satisfied and leave her ghost alone. But it remembered. It remembered the taste of whole, pure joy. Now everything fell into place. It wasn't hunting a living girl, but a ghost, a concentrated echo of happiness. I'm an idiot. I pointed it right at this," I said again. "Yes, it will come for me to shake out the remaining pieces of her memory. and take the bell. Heavy silence hung in the apartment. The three of us sat in the sterile kitchen like in a morgue's waiting room, waiting for footsteps behind the door. "There has to be a way," Jake whispered. "It can't be impossible to stop." "It can only be satisfied," Mrs. Martinez repeated. "Give it something it wants more than anything in the world, something absolutely whole, unbroken, uncracked, pure, unclouded life." She looked at us, and in her gaze I saw resolution. "I know what to do." Standing up, she went to the hallway, to those bags in the corner. We followed her. She untied one of them. Inside weren't just broken things, there were hundreds, thousands of fragments. Mirror shards, pieces of dishes, glass. They glimmered dully in the light. "This is its nest," she said. "Its essence, it's woven from them." She began rummaging through other bags. There were headless dolls, torn books, stopped clocks, a whole graveyard of other people's lives. Finally, from the very back corner, she extracted something wrapped in old burlap. Unwrapping the bundle, we saw a mirror. Large, oval, in a heavy frame blackened with age. But it was whole. Not a single crack, not a single scratch. Its surface was so smooth and dark it seemed like looking into a well. "What is this?" I asked. "This is what they broke when building this house," she answered. "Its heart, its prison. I managed to collect it piece by piece, glue it together, but it sleeps. To wake it, a sacrifice is needed." "You want to trap it?" Jake asked hopefully. "Yes, but for that, someone has to go inside. Voluntarily give themselves completely. Become a new anchor, a new core for its prison." She looked at me. "It chose you, boy. It's bound to you. Only you can do this." I recoiled, go into the mirror. Forever become part of this creature. No, I can't. "Then it will kill us all," she said simply. "First it will take Maria's laughter, then your friend, then it will come back for you. And it won't be a quick death. It will devour you piece by piece, every day." At that moment we heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, heavy, my footsteps, it had returned. It didn't bother knocking. There was a deafening crack, and the door shuddered from a powerful blow. Another blow, the wood splintered. "Decide, Tyler," Jake shouted. His face was white with fear. I looked at my reflection in the dark surface of the ancient mirror. It was calm. It was waiting. Behind me, the blows grew louder and more furious. I understood Mrs. Martinez was right. This was the only way out. Better to end it myself than slowly fade away. Better to finish this on my own terms. "I agree," I croaked. "Good," she nodded. Her face was stern and focused. "Look into the mirror, don't look away. Remember everything best you've had. The brightest moments, it will go toward that light." The door burst off its hinges with a deafening crash. In the doorway stood it, my double. Its clothes were dusty, its face distorted with rage from the deception and anticipation of being close to its goal. "You lied to me," it growled. Its gaze darted to the bags, then to Mrs. Martinez. "Give her to me." But then it saw the large mirror and me in front of it. It froze. Its rage was replaced by something else, recognition and all-consuming greed. It saw not me, it saw gates leading to wholeness, to even greater power. "What do I need to do?" I asked Mrs. Martinez, not taking my eyes off my reflection. "One step," she whispered, "when it gets closer." It moved slowly toward us. It wasn't walking toward me, but toward the mirror. It reached out its hands like toward a source of water in the desert. "Jake, goodbye," I said, feeling tears run down my cheeks. "Tyler, maybe we don't have to," he cried. Closing my eyes, I remembered Mom, her smile, my first trip to the ocean, the taste of those very tamales when everything was just beginning and seemed harmless. I gathered all the scraps of light that remained in me. It was already very close. Behind my back, I felt its cold breath. "Now," Mrs. Martinez commanded. I opened my eyes and stepped forward. The world disappeared. There was no pain, no cold. There was a sensation of falling into infinite velvet darkness. And then I felt something huge, hungry, and malicious falling after me, trying to grab me, swallow me. But I was already part of this darkness. Was in every drop of it was this mirror. I felt it thrashing inside, racing around looking for an exit. But there was no exit. I had become its prison. We were locked together forever. The last thing I saw, as if from outside, were Jake's and Mrs. Martinez's faces looking at the smooth, dark surface of the mirror. Then their images dissolved. I was alone with the howling creature inside. Time flowed differently here, or didn't flow at all. I was both prison and jailer, eternally struggling, eternally on guard. After what could have been months or years, I began to catch weak echoes of the outside world. I saw Jake. He sometimes came to Mrs. Martinez. They sat in that same empty kitchen, and she baked tamales again. Or rather, created their aroma every Thursday. Once I saw a new student from our building come to her. A skinny freshman with hungry eyes. He brought her a broken watch. She gave him a bag, and when he left, I saw her look at the large mirror at me. In her eyes there was no pity, only infinite fatigue and calculation. "Tamales are bait," her words echoed in my eternal darkness. I understood the true meaning. Broken things were just the first stage. They fed the entity small doses, but they were also a filter. Those who brought special things, things with strong echoes, like my great-grandfather's locket, became candidates. Candidates for the role of new anchor when the old one weakened. Mrs. Martinez wasn't just feeding the beast. She was looking for a new prison for it, again and again. Her payment to the entity wasn't just her daughter's laughter, but the eternal role of recruiter, dooming others to my fate to delay the creature's complete liberation. And the tamales were bait in this endless, monstrous fishing expedition. And you, the one Jake is telling this story to now, you like tamales too, don't you? Especially when they're almost free. Jake's phone call sliced through the thick silence of my cramped studio apartment like a hot knife through butter. I'd been rotting there for 3 months without steady work, barely scraping by with odd jobs that barely covered rent and ramen noodles. The place felt more like a tomb than a home. Jake's voice, as always, was energetic, almost manic. "There's an opportunity, Ryan." He shouted into the phone so loud I had to pull it away from my ear. "Massive money, man. Security work at a research facility. They call it Sector 0. Yeah, it's out in the middle of nowhere with some weird requirements, but we can handle it, right?" I didn't know then that Jake's idea of weird requirements and Sector 0's actual protocols were like comparing a puddle to an ocean. I also didn't know that my so-called friend had already made his decision, and I was just a convenient variable in his equation. But in that moment, his words sounded like salvation. Massive money was exactly the argument that could pull me out of the swamp of despair I was slowly sinking into. What kind of facility? What's Sector 0? I tried to get some details, but Jake just brushed me off. Does it matter, Ryan? The important thing is they pay, and they pay well. It's like security guards, but on a serious level. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off schedule. Almost like a vacation, you know. Look, just pack your stuff. We leave the day after tomorrow. I already arranged everything. His confidence was a little unsettling, but the prospect of feeling human again, instead of being an extension of my couch, outweighed my concerns. Besides, Jake and I went way back to high school. We'd been through plenty together. He was always the more reckless one, while I preferred to measure twice, cut once. But right now, the situation was such that there wasn't time to measure, and there wasn't much to cut either. What kind of weird requirements, though? I managed to squeeze out of him just as he was about to hang up. "Oh, just minor stuff," he laughed. "They say the communication is spotty up there, and the management has some quirks. But where don't you find quirky management? We'll pull through, Ryan. It's not our first rodeo." The next 2 days flew by in feverish preparation. I packed my few belongings, warned my landlord I might be moving out, and tried to ignore the nagging worm of doubt writhing in my gut. Jake was my friend. He wouldn't steer me wrong, especially when he was getting into it himself, right? The journey to Sector 0 took almost 24 hours. First by train to some nowhere station, whose name I didn't even bother to remember. Then another 5 hours on a rattling bus that seemed ready to fall apart at any moment. Around us stretched endless forests broken up by abandoned towns. The typical landscape of rural Appalachia that radiated loneliness and hopelessness. Jake spent the whole trip telling stories and trying to crack jokes, but even his optimism gradually faded under the weight of this depressing scenery. The road, if you could call it that, was 2 broken tire tracks disappearing into thick woods. The sun was already setting, and the forest around us began filling with shadows and disturbing rustles. "Charming," I muttered, shouldering my bag. "Just like a resort." Jake just grunted. "It's fine, Ryan. At least there's no competition, and look at this fresh air." The air was indeed fresh, almost too fresh. Cool, damp, smelling of decay, and something else indefinably disturbing. We walked in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. My thoughts weren't exactly cheerful. Where were we going? What kind of work was this where there wasn't even a proper road? And then, just as it was getting dark, we saw it. Sector 0 didn't look like what I'd expected. Instead of some futuristic facility, we found ourselves staring at what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation built into the mountainside. A massive concrete entrance was set into the rock face, sealed with heavy steel doors. The whole thing was surrounded by tall chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. The atmosphere around it was oppressive. Even the birds didn't sing here. At the single gate, heavy and industrial, we were met by a man. He was grim, unshaven, with tired eyes that had seen too much. He wore a shapeless work jumpsuit and introduced himself as Cole, our supervisor. "Fresh meat," he said, looking us up and down like we were livestock instead of people. "Well, come on then. Time to take over." He didn't go into details, just led us inside the perimeter to a small concrete building that looked more like a bunker than an office. Inside was Spartan. 2 cots, a table, a couple of chairs, and a control panel bristling with switches and indicators. Most of the facility, we learned, was powered down. Only our little island of civilization was running, along with some vital systems deeper in the complex. Cole shoved a thick, worn folder into my hands. protocol for Sector 0. Everything you need to know is in here. You memorize it. Your life and mine depend on it when I come back." The way he emphasized those last words sent a chill down my spine. "What exactly are we guarding?" Jake asked, trying to maintain his usual cocky tone, but I caught the tension in his voice. Cole's smile was crooked and humorless. "That's not your business. Your business is following protocol. Follow it, you'll live to see your relief and get your money. Don't follow it, well, that becomes your problem." He waved toward the facility entrance. "It doesn't like it when rules get broken." Then he quickly, almost like a chant, listed the main points. In the folder, they were laid out in more detail with diagrams and charts, but Cole gave us the simplified version, apparently for better retention. "Listen carefully. I won't repeat myself. The rules are few, but they're iron law." He held up one finger. "First, the sound barrier. Twice daily, exactly at 11 p.m. and 5 a.m., you activate the perimeter sound barrier. This button here." He pointed to a large red button on the control panel. "Exactly 33 minutes. Not a second more, not a second less. If you don't time it right or forget, what roams outside will definitely hear you. And trust me, you don't want that." I exchanged glances with Jake. What roams outside? I wanted to ask, but Cole's expression didn't invite questions. He held up a second finger. "Second, Omega Cooling. Every Tuesday and Friday from 2 to 2:45 p.m., following this schematic." He tapped the folder. "You manually regulate the coolant flow to Omega chamber. That's deep in the facility where you have no business going without cause. Any mistake or missed session, and what's frozen down there might wake up very cranky. And when it's cranky, it becomes, let's say, very active." "Frozen," Jake mumbled, his face going slightly pale. Cole ignored him and held up a third finger. "Third, evening melody. Every night before you sleep, but no later than 1 a.m., cassette number 7 must play in the rest area. Here it is." He pointed to an old cassette player and a stack of tapes next to it. 15 minutes, no more, no less. Remember that. Cassette number 7, 15 minutes. Any other music or silence and it won't sleep, and you don't want it awake. Now I couldn't hold back. "Who is it? What's inside?" "What's inside," Cole said shortly, "is not your concern. Your concern is keeping it asleep." Fourth finger. "Fourth, the red door, taboo. The door to Archive Block Alpha. Red door, you can't miss it. Must always be locked with 3 locks. Here are the keys." He tossed a ring of 3 massive keys on the table. "Only enter with direct radio orders from the curator. The curator will contact you by radio if needed. Go in on your own, contracts canceled, and you, well, let's say you just disappear from the facility, from all records, forever." I swallowed hard. Disappearing from the facility didn't sound very promising. Fifth finger, and last, no prying eyes. No photographs, video recording, or personal journals about what happens here. If we find anything like that, we confiscate it and eliminate you as an information leak. Understood. Cole swept us with his heavy gaze. "Any questions?" "No, perfect." He grabbed his beat-up bag, threw us a quick "good luck, rookies," and without looking back, strode toward the gate. Within a minute, his silhouette dissolved into the gathering dusk. We were alone. Alone with this silent facility, the protocol folder, and a bunch of unasked questions that apparently nobody was going to answer. "Well, Ryan, here we are," Jake tried to joke, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Massive money, like they say. Just a bit creepy here, though." I nodded silently, opening the folder. Protocol for Sector 0. The first pages were filled with technical terms and instructions for maintaining various equipment, most of which apparently wasn't working. But then came those same rules Cole had outlined, only in more detail. Schematics, graphs, warnings highlighted in red. And not a word about what kind of facility this was, who or what roamed outside, what was frozen in Omega Chamber, or what wouldn't sleep without the evening melody. The first night passed relatively quietly. Relatively. We carefully followed the instructions, activated the sound barrier exactly at 11 p.m. Nothing happened. No sounds, no changes. Just oppressive silence all around and the feeling of some invisible presence. I barely slept, listening to every rustle. Jake was also tossing and turning on his cot. At 5 a.m., the sound barrier again. Another 33 minutes of silence, only denser somehow. In the morning, we made our first patrol of the perimeter. The facility was silent, the forest around it equally lifeless. No bird songs, no animals, just wind rustling in the treetops, and that rustling somehow reminded me of quiet, ominous whispers. The security cameras installed around the perimeter were, as Cole had said, empty. They just showed static images, sections of fence, pieces of the facility wall, forest. No movement, but the feeling that you were being watched never left, not for a second. The first few days, I tried to do everything by the book, like clockwork. Every protocol point was executed with obsessive precision. Fear was a good motivator. Jake was also cautious at first, but his natural recklessness gradually took over. He started joking around, making sarcastic comments, saying it was all just a way to keep us on edge so we wouldn't slack off. "Come on, Ryan," he'd say when I checked the time again before activating the barrier. "So what if we're a minute late? Will the sky fall?" Cole said whatever's outside will hear us, I reminded him. "And have you seen anything outside?" Jake would smirk. "Maybe there are hedgehogs out there, particularly sensitive to noise." But even he didn't dare openly break the rules. The invisible presence, however, became increasingly tangible. Sometimes, a sudden chill would run down my spine even though the room was warm. Sometimes I'd catch some unclear whisper out of the corner of my ear, words impossible to make out. A couple of times I thought I saw some shadow flicker in a dark corner of the room. But when I turned my head, there was nothing. Jake also startled and looked around a few times, but immediately pretended nothing had happened. It was especially eerie during shifts at the control panel. You'd sit alone, listening to the silence, and it seemed to press down on you, thicken, and it felt like dozens of invisible eyes were watching you from the darkness outside. I checked the door locks several times, even though I knew they were secure. Irrational fear crept under my skin, making my heart beat faster. Several times a week, a vehicle would arrive. Always the same one, an old beat-up military truck, olive green. Two silent men in the same type of coveralls as Cole would get out. They'd bring food, water, fuel canisters for the generator, take away trash. They wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't answer ours. They'd just do their job and leave. The only thread connecting us to the outside world was the radio we used to report, situation normal, once a day. The curator, the same one who could give orders to open the red door, always responded with the same flat, emotionless voice. Acknowledged. Jake and I barely talked about our feelings. Whether we were afraid to admit our own fear to each other or didn't want to make the atmosphere worse, I don't know. But tension hung in the air, thick and sticky. "You know, Ryan," Jake said one day, staring at the flickering screen of an empty camera, "sometimes I think this facility is alive, like it's studying us." I just shrugged then, but deep down I agreed with him. This place was wrong, alien, and we were just specks being observed by something huge and incomprehensible. After some time, the first warning bell rang. It was Tuesday, Omega cooling day. Jake and I, as usual, went to the technical section located at the base of the facility. This was our only allowed access inside. A long, dimly lit corridor leading to a massive steel door marked Omega Chamber, unauthorized entry prohibited. Next to the door was a control panel with valves, gauges, and switches. We had to follow the schematic from the folder, turning several valves in a specific sequence and with specific pressure to regulate the coolant flow. Simple work, but requiring precision. That day, Jake was distracted. The night before, he'd found a small flask of whiskey in his things that he claimed he'd thoughtfully hidden from himself for a rainy day. Apparently, the rainy day had arrived. He'd taken a couple of good swigs before the procedure, saying it was for courage. I tried to talk him out of it, but he just waved me off. And then, when we were almost finished, he either mixed up the valves or applied too much force. But one of the gauges suddenly jumped into the red zone, and from behind the Omega door came a strange scraping sound, like something huge and metallic had shifted. We froze. The sound repeated, louder than again. Thick white vapor began pouring from under the door, reeking of ozone and something else, something animal and primitive. "What was that?" I whispered, feeling the hair on my neck stand up. "Hell if I know." Jake looked scared, his bravado evaporating. We quickly finished the procedure, returning all readings to normal, and got out of the technical section fast. The scraping didn't repeat, but the feeling that we'd awakened something stayed with us until evening. That night, we listened to the evening melody with special attention, afraid to miss even a second. And that night, I had a nightmare where I stood before that same door to Omega, and it slowly, with scraping, opened. And from the darkness, something huge and eyeless looked at me and reached toward me with its icy tentacles or claws. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding like crazy. Jake was sleeping, face buried in his pillow. Outside, the wind was howling, and in its wails I heard some kind of moaning. In the morning, we found no traces of our incident. The Omega door was closed, the vapor gone, but something had changed. The atmosphere became even more oppressive, and the silence became somehow tense, like the calm before a storm. I started noticing that Jake was hitting his flask more often. Isolation and routine, multiplied by constant fear, were clearly getting to him harder than to me. I tried talking to him, convinced him that alcohol was a bad helper here, but he just brushed me off. "Relax, Ryan," he'd say, pouring himself another shot. "What's one drink going to do? And then another. We're like in prison here, except they pay us for it. Got to relieve stress somehow." And then one evening, after a particularly hard day when our generator was acting up, and we spent half the day trying to fix it, Jake, already quite drunk, declared that the evening melody was nonsense. "Seriously, Ryan, do you believe this crap?" He waved toward the cassette player. 15 minutes of some droning music so it goes to sleep. This is ridiculous. Let's skip this junk tonight, or put on my tape. I've got a good collection, rock and roll. I tried to argue, talked about protocol, about coal, about possible consequences. But Jake was insistent. What's going to happen? So it won't sleep one night. Big deal. Maybe it'll like rock and roll better than this depressing music box. I don't know what came over me. Whether it was fatigue, my own stress, or the alcohol fumes that had gotten to me too. Jake convinced me to skip a small one for the successful generator repair. In short, I gave up. Fine, I said, do what you want. But if something happens, I'm not involved. Actually, we just forgot. Alcohol did its job, made us drowsy, and we crashed without turning on either cassette number 7 or any other. The rest area was silent, broken only by our drunken snoring. The consequences didn't take long. I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that a concrete slab had been placed on my chest. I couldn't breathe. My eyes opened on their own, but the room was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The generator had apparently died again, or something had shut it off. I tried to take a breath, managed only a hoarse, short wheeze. Panic began squeezing my throat with icy fingers. I wanted to call Jake, but no sound came from my mouth. And then I heard the building moan. Not creaking from wind, not humming from machinery, but actually moaning. Low, drawn out, like a giant unknown beast turning in its sleep, and this moan was full of nightmares. The vibration came from somewhere below, from the earth itself, passed through the cot, through my whole body, resonated in my teeth. The glass of water I always put on the nightstand was trembling slightly, quietly clinking against the wooden surface. I lay paralyzed with terror, unable to move, unable even to scream. How long this lasted, I don't know. Maybe several minutes, maybe an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The pressure on my chest eased. I could take a gasping, deep breath. The silence that crashed down on the room seemed even more ominous than the previous moaning. I don't know how long I lay there, afraid to even move. Then, with a shaking hand, I found the flashlight on the nightstand. The beam of light picked Jake's face out of the darkness. He was sleeping, turned toward the wall, and seemed not to have woken up, or pretended not to have woken up. Somehow waiting for dawn, which seemed would never come, I got up. My legs were like cotton. The first thing that caught my eye was the doors. All the doors in our small living block, to the rest area, to the bathroom, to the tiny storage room, were wide open, though I clearly remembered locking each one before going to sleep. The red door was locked with all its locks, as required. Jake woke up a little later with a headache and looking like a beaten dog. When I told him about the night's special effects and showed him the doors, he just shrugged. Maybe there was a draft, he suggested uncertainly. A draft that opens locks latched from the inside and presses on your chest so you can't breathe. I looked at him doubtfully. I don't know, Ryan. Maybe you dreamed it all after yesterday. He rubbed his temples. And the doors, well, maybe we forgot to close them. We were pretty out of it. But I knew I hadn't forgotten. And it wasn't a dream. The facility, whatever lived in it, had reacted to our oversight. The violation of the evening melody rule hadn't gone unnoticed. We were scared, very scared. The next several days we walked on eggshells, following every protocol point with doubled, if not tripled, care. Cassette number 7 played its 15 minutes every evening, and we both sat and listened to this haunting, almost hypnotic music, afraid to even breathe too loudly. The sound barrier was activated down to the second. Omega cooling went without a hitch. Jake was sober as glass and focused like never before. But it, or whatever was there, had already sensed weakness. Or maybe our violation had given it some new impulse. The invisible presence became not just tangible, it became aggressive. Small but unpleasant tricks began. Once, I was going down the metal staircase leading from the guard post to the technical section. The stairs were old, a bit rusty, but quite reliable. And there, in the middle of the way, someone seemed to push me hard in the back. I couldn't hold on. My feet slipped off the step, and I went flying down. I barely managed to grab the railing, rolled a couple of steps, scraped my palms and elbow, badly bruised my knee. I turned around, nobody there. Jake was upstairs at the control panel at that time. I could see him. "What happened?" he shouted from above, hearing the crash. "Fell," I croaked, getting up. "Like someone pushed me." "Who's going to push you there, Ryan?" he grinned. "Got to be more careful." But I knew it wasn't just an accident. I felt that push, not strong but precise, calculated. Then Jake's favorite mug broke out of nowhere. It was just sitting on the table, then suddenly crack, and it shattered into small pieces. Jake went ballistic, started yelling that I'd knocked it over and wouldn't admit it. We almost got into a fight. I didn't even go near the table, I defended myself. "Then who did? The Holy Ghost," he raged. Then my flashlight disappeared right before the night perimeter patrol. I clearly remembered leaving it on the shelf by the exit, searched everywhere, nowhere to be found. Had to take the backup one, dim and uncomfortable. Jake swore up and down he hadn't taken the flashlight. It was found 2 days later in the most unexpected place, in the cleaning supplies drawer under some rags. Small things, yes, but they accumulated like a snowball, sowing distrust, irritation, fear between us. It, or the facility, or whoever was running this show, was clearly trying to turn us against each other, make us more vulnerable individually. And it was working. We started snapping at each other more often, suspecting each other of petty nonsense. The atmosphere became increasingly toxic. Jake started drinking again. First a little secretly, then almost openly. He said it made it easier to handle this madhouse, but I saw that alcohol only made him more careless, more aggressive. His mistakes started repeating. Sometimes he'd turn on the sound barrier a couple minutes late than required. "Got distracted, Ryan. Happens to everyone," he'd brush off my reproaches. After one such delay, we heard such a howl outside that blood turned to ice in our veins. A long, multi-voiced howl full of some primitive longing and rage. It came not from one direction, but seemed to surround the facility in a tight ring of sound. We sat in the guard post, afraid to move, until the howling stopped on its own, somewhere after half an hour. In the morning, we found huge, deep, pressed-in tracks by the facility walls in the soft earth after recent rain. Inhuman tracks, the size of a good shovel, with 3 long, sharp claws. We'd never seen such tracks before. "Well, there you go," I said to Jake, pointing to one of the prints. "You're a couple minutes late." Jake paled but immediately put on his usual bravado. "Come on, Ryan. Maybe they're moose or something, mutated ones roaming around here. Who knows what lives in the forest?" But I saw fear in his eyes, the same fear I had. Then he messed something up with Omega cooling. Again, after his manipulations with the valves, that same scraping came from the technical section, only this time it was louder and longer. Added to it was some low, vibrating hum that made your ears hurt. We didn't wait to see how it would end and got out of there like we'd been scalded. The rest of the day we walked on pins and needles, expecting some new trouble, but nothing happened. Apparently, whatever was in Omega just turned over and went back to sleep, or was waiting. I started seriously suspecting that Jake's mistakes weren't so accidental. But why would he do this? Did he want to test the facility's strength or himself? Or had he just stopped caring about everything under the influence of alcohol and fear? I tried to talk to him honestly, but he avoided answering, snapped back, accused me of paranoia. "Ryan, you're winding yourself up," he'd say. "Everything's fine. It's just stressful work, and you're making a tragedy out of every little thing." But I saw how he'd changed. From a perpetually cheerful, slightly reckless guy, he was turning into a gloomy, twitchy type with darting eyes. He started sleeping worse, often waking up at night, muttering something in his sleep. And more often, his gaze stopped on the red door. That same one leading to Archive Block Alpha, the door that was taboo. The atmosphere in our little room was heating up every day. We almost stopped talking, communicating only as necessary for protocol execution. I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Constant fear, lack of sleep, tension, this oppressive feeling of alien presence, all of it was exhausting, draining. Jake, on the other hand, became somehow feverishly excited. He stopped drinking so openly, but I smelled alcohol on his breath in the mornings. And he started talking about the red door, first in hints, then more and more insistently. "Ryan, don't you think all the answers are there, behind that door?" He said one evening when we were silently staring at the camera monitors. "You need the curator's order to get in," I reminded him wearily. "And you know what happens if you go in on your own." "What curator, Ryan?" he burst out. "Have you heard him except for his acknowledged? Maybe he doesn't exist at all, and we're sitting here like two idiots waiting for this thing to devour us one by one. We need to find out for ourselves what we're dealing with. Maybe there's a way to stop all this, or at least understand what's happening." He spoke passionately, convincingly. In his eyes burned some unhealthy fire. I initially brushed off his suggestions, said it was madness, that we'd only make things worse. But he wouldn't let up. Every day he returned to this conversation, bringing up more and more new arguments. "Look, Ryan, they didn't just forbid going there for no reason. That means there's something important there, something they don't want us to know. And if we know, we can protect ourselves. Or they'll eliminate us as an information leak, like it says in the protocol," I countered. "Who's going to eliminate us? Those two silent guys in the truck don't make me laugh. They're more afraid of this place than we are." His persistence, multiplied by my own despair and fear, gradually began to bear fruit. The worm of doubt he so diligently planted in my soul began to sprout. What if he was right? What if behind that door there really were answers? What if there was a way to get out of this nightmare? The curator was silent. The situation was getting worse. Night visits, strange sounds, the facility's aggressive behavior. How much longer could we last like this? I started wavering. Fear of the unknown behind the red door fought in me with fear of what was happening here and now. And the second fear gradually began to outweigh the first. "We don't even know what's there, Jake," I said once when he brought up his broken record again. "Maybe there's something there that'll finish us off immediately. Maybe not," he didn't give up. "Maybe there's documentation or weapons or anything. But sitting with our hands folded waiting for them to pick us off one by one is not an option. We have to do something. At some point, driven to the limit by this endless psychological pressure, fear that no longer let go for a minute, and what the hell, weak hope that Jake might be right, I gave in. Fine, I said in a hollow voice, feeling something inside me break. But if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong, Jake cut me off, his eyes gleaming. We'll just take a quick look and that's it. Nobody will know. The main thing is to do it quietly. The decision was made. Fatal decision. We were going to break the most important rule, open the red door. I somehow felt that after this, there would be no way back. Not for me, not for Jake, not for anyone. We waited for deep night. The generator was running smoothly. The light bulb above the control panel dimly illuminated our tense faces. The sound barrier had been off for a long time. There were still several hours until the morning activation. The silence in the guard post was such that you could hear our hearts beating. "Well, ready?" Jake whispered, taking the ring of 3 keys from his pocket. Those same ones from Archive Block Alpha. I nodded silently, feeling cold sweat break out on my back. We were doomed, I knew it, but for some reason I followed him like a sheep to slaughter. The red door was at the far end of the technical corridor, the same one that led to Omega. It really was red, bright red like it was painted with fresh blood, and it had 3 massive deadbolt locks. With shaking hands, Jake inserted the first key into the lock. A dry click. Then the second, third. The door gave slightly inward, and through the crack came the smell of stale dust, formaldehyde, and something else, something indefinably disturbing. My stomach dropped. Jake pushed the door. It opened slowly, silently, inviting us into darkness. He stepped in first, I followed, clutching the flashlight in my hand. What we saw made me freeze in place. Archive Block Alpha turned out to be huge, much bigger than you could suppose from outside. High shelves reaching to the ceiling stretched deep into the room, disappearing into darkness. And all of them were packed not with document folders as I'd expected, but with strange, murky jars with specimens floating in them. Incomprehensible, shapeless pieces of flesh, organs, some hideous creatures frozen in formaldehyde. Some jars were empty, but you could see some dark sediment on the bottom. Between the shelves with jars stood other shelves where folders really did lie. Thick, dusty ones with top secret stamps and various code designations. I shone the flashlight on one of the nearest folders. On the cover was embossed Protocol Sector 0, Integration Stage 7. My insides went cold. Integration, what did that mean? Jake, meanwhile, was already rummaging on one of the shelves. He was clearly looking for something specific. "Here it is," he suddenly exclaimed in a whisper, pulling a small metal box from the depths of the shelf. He quickly opened it. Inside, on a velvet cushion, lay an ordinary flash drive. I came closer, frantically trying to understand what was happening. What integration? What was in these jars? How did all this relate to us? I grabbed one of the folders, the one that was on top with the inscription, Protocol Sector 0, Report on Subject 17, Supervisor Cole, M. Cole, our supervisor. I opened the folder. Inside were photographs of Cole, ordinary ones like for an ID card, and then came some medical reports, graphs, diagrams, pages of observations written in incomprehensible handwriting. And the last page, integration completed successfully. Subject number 17 shows complete loyalty to protocol, ready for cyclical duty. My head spun. What did this mean? Loyalty to protocol. Cole, was he part of all this? And then I heard a click behind me. I turned around. Jake was standing in the doorway leading back to the corridor. In his hand was not a flashlight, but something like a small remote with one single button. "Sorry, Ryan." On his face was a strange, crooked smirk I'd never seen before. Something predatory, alien, to each his own. "They promised me freedom and very, very big money for a sucker like you. And for this flash drive, of course." He nodded at the box he held in his other hand. "Jake, what are you doing?" I couldn't believe it, my friend. "You'll become part of the protocol, Ryan. A new, improved version. They've been looking for suitable material for a long time, and you turned out to be so receptive, so right." At first his voice sounded calm, even somehow mundane, and that made it even scarier. "What are you talking about?" My voice was shaking. I took a step toward him. "I wouldn't advise it." He raised his hand with the remote. "This door will close now, and another will open, the one leading to Omega. You don't want to meet what's frozen there too closely, though soon you'll become one." He pressed the button. The red door began closing with a dull thud, cutting off the escape route. I rushed to it, but it was too late. A massive bolt clanged into place from the other side. I was alone in the archive with the jars, and the horrifying realization of what had happened. Jake, my friend, had betrayed me, sold me for money and freedom, and I was supposed to become part of the protocol. I pounded on the red door with my fists, kicked it, screamed Jake's name until I lost my voice. Useless. The door was monolithic, soundproof. From the other side was silence, or so it seemed to me through my own hoarse breathing and the pounding of blood in my temples. Panic gave way to some numbness. I sat on the floor, leaning back against the cold metal of the door. The flashlight fell from my hand and rolled across the floor, picking hideous exhibits out of the darkness in the jars. Integration, what the hell was that, and why me? I looked again at the folder with Cole's report. Integration completed successfully. Subject number 17 shows complete loyalty to protocol. Cole, he wasn't just a supervisor. He was part of this system, processed material. And now, apparently, it was my turn. Somewhere in the depths of the archive came a quiet hum growing, and with it that familiar ozone smell, the same one from the Omega door. I went cold. This door will close now, and another will open, the one leading to Omega. Jake's words echoed in my head. I jumped up, frantically looking around. The archive was large, but the exit, as I understood, was only one. The red door now sealed tight, but where was this other door? The hum intensified, and a low-frequency vibration was added to it, making the floor under my feet slowly tremble. One of the archive walls, the one opposite the shelves with jars, suddenly began glowing from within with a dim greenish light. Contours of a huge circular opening that hadn't been there before appeared on it. This wasn't a door, this was an airlock. It began slowly, silently opening like the diaphragm of a gigantic lens, letting in clouds of icy vapor and that same primitive, animal smell that almost made me sick. Beyond the opening was darkness, impenetrable, absolute. From this darkness came such deathly cold that my teeth chattered. I backed away, retreating until I hit the shelf with jars. One of them fell with a crash, breaking, dousing me with icy, stinking slime. What was inside flopped onto the floor. Some slimy gray lump remotely resembling a human brain, only larger, and with thin, pulsating threads extending from it. I screamed or tried to scream, but only a strangled squeak came from my throat. From the circular opening in the wall, it appeared. What had been frozen in Omega? I couldn't make out its shape in the darkness and clouds of vapor. It was huge, shapeless. It flowed, moved like living mercury, and it reached for me. Not with tentacles, not with claws. It reached for me with its very essence, its mass, filling space, displacing air. The last thing I remember is Jake's smirk and his words. "Sorry, Ryan, to each his own. They promised me freedom and money for a sucker like you, and you'll become part of the protocol." The door slammed shut. The red door of my prison and my transformation. Now I hear it not only outside, but inside myself. It fills my thoughts, my memories, erasing my personality, replacing it with something else. Cold, indifferent, eternal. I feel my body changing. My skin becomes pale and thin, almost transparent. Dark veins show through it, pulsing in rhythm with the facility's hum. My bones ache, my joints twist, but there's no pain. There's only cold and this merging. I'm no longer Ryan. I'm part of the facility, part of the protocol. I'm the new supervisor, the new Cole, waiting for my time to pass the baton to the next sucker. The corporation has perfected their process. They've learned to take desperate people, broken people like me, and turn them into perfect guardians. No more hiring unreliable humans who might ask questions or make mistakes. Now they create their own staff, loyal beyond question, integrated into the very fabric of their dark experiments. Jake played his part perfectly. He was never my friend, never desperate for work. He was a recruiter, a hunter, seeking the right kind of mind. Someone isolated, someone who had lost everything, someone who would trust completely when offered salvation. The flash drive he took contains the next phase protocols, the next evolution of their integration process. And somewhere out there, he's already identifying the next subject, spinning the same web of lies and false friendship. The facility hums around me, content. It has what it needs. Another guardian, another integrated component of its vast, hungry consciousness. The experiments continue in the depths, growing more ambitious, more terrible with each passing day. I understand now what the specimens in those jars were. Failed attempts, early prototypes, the ones who couldn't be properly integrated, whose minds shattered before the process was complete. They float there still, conscious enough to suffer, trapped forever between human and something else. But I am a success. Subject 18, my integration is flawless. And I know that tonight, somewhere far from here, Jake will make another phone call to another desperate soul. The words will be the same. There's an opportunity, massive money, security work at a research facility. The cycle continues. It always continues. The red door will open again when the curator commands it, when the next subject needs to see the truth, when the next integration begins. I'm ready. I know the protocol now. I know what must be done. Because I am no longer Ryan Martinez from a cramped apartment, drowning in despair. I am Supervisor 18, and my loyalty to the protocol is absolute. The facility sleeps around me, dreaming its cold dreams of expansion, of evolution, of the day when all of humanity will understand the beauty of integration. And I dream with it, patient and eternal, waiting for the next fool to trust the wrong friend. Unfortunately, our main character didn't survive, and will simply await the end of his, so to say, existence. And Jake is not a good person. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.